It was one of the first times that I heard somebody say, well, it's like, well, it's not that hard for you. Like, you just naturally athletic. And I was like,
you got those fast twists.
Exactly. I was like, what does it have to do? Like, I still had to work. Like, long story short, Sergeant Cashe hit that IED, and the story as it was told to me is that the vehicle, caught on fire, and the back of the Bradley, which is a ramp, was kind of knocked off the hinge. So the Bradley, it's a great fighting vehicle, but it's a goddamn death trap if you ever get caught in it. My second experience was my sister platoon was the platoon of Sergeant First Class Alan Cashe. And you know Cashe's story or whatever. And first thing he did when he met me, he's like, what you doing here? I was like, I'm taking over the platoon, taking over first platoon. And he's like, first platoon? And he was like, you ain't taking over first platoon. I was like, oh no, my bad, I'm taking over second platoon. He's like, you ain't know what platoon you taking over. He's like, goddamn Chicago. He's like, I done read your file. I know what you here for. And I was like, I don't even know you. Like what is? He's like, Chicago. He's like, let me tell you this. He's like, I'm infantry. He's like, I've been around a bunch of times. He's like, I've seen about 5 black PLs. He's like, my PL that I have now, which is actually a good friend of mine. He's like, and you. He's like, I don't think you're gonna make it. I was like,
what the fuck?
Like, I just got here. Like, I'm fresh. I mean, fresh. Like, my DCU still fresh. Everything, still brand new. Like, as you know, like, even though like all racism isn't, I guess, prevalent, it is out there, and it's never stopped me in the military. It's never like held me back. There's always going to be somebody who's ignorant, but as like Cat Williams said in that special a long time ago, like, if you don't got a few haters, you're not doing something right. So, and Sergeant Cashe, covered in gas, essentially was like basically pulling people out, going back in for people. Like he escaped out of the Bradley after it had been hit, covered in gas, covered essentially, covered in a flammable liquid. He went back, I don't know how many times, so I wasn't there, to help try and save as many as possible. Me and a few other individuals there, we had to like receive them, and I saw those 3 bodies, and I was just like, is this just fucking inept leadership? Like, yeah. Or was this like ego? I was like, or am I just in the wrong place and standards are starting to lack and things starting to change?
What's going on, folks? Welcome back to Beyond the Beret. Today I just call him T.O. He can introduce himself to you guys. He is a third grouper, was a team leader on my old team right before I left, right? And I wanted to bring him on because a lot of you guys have been asking me to interview 18 Alphas, so he'll be the first one on the channel, I think. Yeah, because Jake is in the Navy, so he doesn't count. Don't count. I did have the guy from 18 Alpha Fitness on, but he's a first grouper, so he technically doesn't count either. So I wanted to bring him on, guys, so he can share his story with you guys in hopes of hopefully motivating somebody out there, right? But before we start telling you his story, I'll ask him a couple of questions, something new that I started doing on the podcast. All right, the first one being, T.O., last book you read, and what was it about? Like, read from like start to end.
Oof. So, as you know, right now I got a newborn, so I haven't finished it yet. But the book I'm currently reading, I guess almost done with, is Ta-Nehisi Coates' Beyond the World to Me. It's basically like just about how he, I guess, came to learn about or understand like his blackness in America and how it basically transitioned over time from, I believe he grew up in Baltimore, and then as he became a writer and then more famous, just how he saw the world not only through his eyes but in like preparation for his son, his family, his mother, etc. Other than that, with my kids, I'm reading Ender's Game. I don't know if you heard about it.
Yeah.
It used to be on the, I think, Marine Corps reading list. It was one of those books we had too in like IOBC.
What is it?
Ender's Game. It's by Orson Scott Card, I want to say. It's like a book based on the future. It's essentially a simulation, like where not a simulation, a situation where before like Earth or whatever, they fought like some like population of bugs or some like outer space creatures or whatever. But they're preparing for like the next generation to fight. And Ender is a 30, as they call it. He's a third child born in a family where you're only allowed to have 2 kids, but their family's like recognized as being like special or like highly educated or like future leaders. So the government authorizes his family to have a third child, and he's essentially like, you call him like the run of the litter, but he has like the intelligence. He's got like the aptitude to understand war, understand people, kind of from an SF point of view. He's like got that unconventional mindset. He can recognize situations, adapt, and lead people. But I'm reading it with my kids, so it's a good book for them to just kind of start getting in that right mindset.
How does that work? Do they read, or you read to them? Like, so, how does that? Because I know with my little ones, we read to them.
Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's both. So they're 11, twins. So we'll do a you read a page, and then pass it on. That way, everybody's staying engaged, everybody's staying. And that's with the twins and my wife, so, and myself, obviously. But it's a good book for them. Gotcha.
You guys ever read, well, if you haven't, I'm sure you've read this one. Everybody's fucking read this at one point in time. Starship Troopers.
Yeah. Of course, you've seen the movie, too, right?
Yeah. I think when everybody hears that, they're automatically like, the movie? Like, fuck no. But I'm like, the book is nothing like the movie.
Yeah.
The book is fucking awesome. Phenomenal book. If you guys haven't read it, I used to... when I had my team, I would make every single new guy read Starship Troopers.
No.
Yeah,
that's smart.
It's a fucking great book. But again, guys, if you guys haven't checked it out, make sure you go read it. The way it breaks down, like, just how people should get the right to vote and what they have to do, because at the end of the day, we abuse that right in this country.
Basically, like, service gives you rights.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. But all right, next question, T.O. If you had a time machine and you could change any event in history, what event would that be? This one's always interesting.
I don't know. That's an interesting one.
Like, I've heard several different answers from, guys wanting to go back and changing 9/11 to dudes wanting to go back and making sure Hitler was never born. The last guest I had, he said he would travel back and try to prevent Martin Luther King from being assassinated. Like, there's all sorts of answers.
Yeah, I wish I tell you I had a good answer. I only say that because I don't know if I would travel back to change history, because it's obviously got us to this point. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'd go back to witness things or to see like how it was to be in a moment rather than change things. Like, go back to see the environment in Germany when Hitler was coming to power. Obviously, you're talking about what their culture believed is like an influential speaker. So obviously, how did he influence people? Mm-hmm. Or to go back and, be in a room with Martin Luther King speaking or Malcolm X speaking, or even like, witnessing the effect that Gandhi had on people. It's hard. And I know, like, probably as a kid, I could say I had an event, but to go back and change things, I wonder how it would influence where we are now, and what would that change, kind of that butterfly effect or ripple effect, if we did kill Hitler as a baby, or, make sure the nuclear bomb wasn't invented, etc. Stop 9/11. I wouldn't have my deployments. I wouldn't have a job. I probably wouldn't have been an SF dude. So,
Gotcha. Next one for you. Knowing what you know now, if you can change your job or choose a alternate special operation, which one would it be? Green Beret is not an option at this point.
If Green Beret wasn't an option, I probably would have sucked it up and became a SEAL.
Yeah.
Only just because it's as close or as direct.
Yeah.
Maybe, if I go back, I wanted to be a Ranger before I ever enact a Ranger bat. But that's almost close because it's Army soft. But I would go Navy SEAL, maybe Marine Force Recon after that, and then Air Force like PJ, because that's a hard job that most people don't know about.
Because I would do Air Force, but their promotion sucks.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that sucks about the Air Force.
It is.
Marine Corps too, though. Like, they promote very slow, especially on the enlisted side. So I don't know.
They never in the leading row. Think about it. How many times have you worked for an Air Force person or a Marine person? Never.
No, never.
But how many times they work for you?
Never.
Exactly.
Yeah, because they're so small, they're always attachments, as opposed to the Navy. They've had the SOTIF before, where we were under them,
Yep,
and
I had the same thing. So
vice versa. Yeah. So
no,
yeah.
but the one good thing about, I'd say, for them and like the Air Force and Marines, because there's so few of them, they always have the Gucci stuff.
Yeah,
like they always like coming with 3-4 kits. They got cry on cry on cry. You're like, man, like. Like I wish I had that type of money.
We got to go buy our own shit.
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. With all that said, guys, we'll jump right into T.O.'s story. T.O., if you don't mind, give the audience a quick overview of your career, and then we'll jump right into how it all started for you with upbringing, and what led you to joining the military.
Ooh. So, a quick breakdown of my career. Started off as an enlisted soldier in the reserves. I was back then a 54 Delta, which was chemical. I think it's like 54 Bravo, maybe 74 Delta now is chemical. Did that, recognized I enjoyed the challenge of the Army, and there were some opportunities there. So I tried to, once I completed basic training AIT, tried to go to get a RIP contract. My reserve unit was like, not no, but fuck no. You owe us 2 years before you can even do any of that. I was halfway through college when I went through when I went through basic training. So I just went ahead, finished college. From there, commissioned military intelligence, branch detail infantry. So, and we can get into that later. You know how the Army breaks it down. You have a control branch and then a temporary loan. From there was third ID for the first 4 years of my career. 2 deployments during that time. Was going to get out, found soft. And from there went to selection, third group, first SFC, SWIC, that whole little gamut. And now I'm towards the latter end of my career as a G3 SOC coordinator over at 18th Airborne Corps. And that's about a total of 23-ish years.
Oh, good times.
Yeah, fact.
So now, how did you get into the Army, and how was upbringing for you? Because you're from Chicago. There's nobody running the streets of Chicago, handing out pamphlets to join the Army. Mm-hmm. So how did that discovery come about?
It was mostly by accident, and accident, I guess, and a little bit of luck and a little bit of timing. As you said, born and raised in Chicago, true Chicago, South Side Chicago. And I say that because I meet a bunch of people and they always like, oh, I'm from Chicago too. And I'm like, oh, where are you from? I'm from 63rd and Drexel, or I lived on 44th and King Drive. And they're like, well, I'm not from Chicago. I'm from the outside of Chicago, but I say that. And I'm like, it's okay to be from Evanston or Highland Park or whatever. Like, I would enjoy if I grew up in the suburbs and I didn't grow up on Old Block and I didn't know what a crackhead was, or, a prostitute or all the other stuff. But anyway, grew up in Chicago. Was good in sports and good. Grades was always been my thing. I knew education was going to get me out of Chicago. And eventually I ended up going to Southern Illinois University. I did about a year-ish there, year plus. And I just couldn't afford it. It was just too much. And I had taken out the loans, but I didn't see like a long-term solution on paying for school. There was always, doing like work study jobs or trying to work 2 or 3 jobs. But I was like, that's just too much. And being first generation going to college, I didn't have a support system. I didn't have anybody telling me like the right way to do it. Long story short, I ended up dropping out for a little time. I worked security at the airport. Shout out to Argent Bright Security at O'Hare Airport. I was a TSA agent back before they was TSA agents. I had the polyester jacket or whatever. But then I just happened to see like a recruitment thing. And I was like, oh, I could just join the reserves, be part-time, get the college money, finish school, yada, yada, yada. So I enlisted, didn't tell anybody in my family, just went, did the whole little recruiter thing. They sold me the story. They showed me some dude in a like pristine room with a white lab coat. He had on BDU pants. He's like, oh, this is what you will do. You don't have to worry about anything. Like, this will be easy. Obviously, I went to basic training. It was AIT. It was none of that. I went to basic training, and like my background, like in high school and a little bit in college, football, wrestling, like track. So literally went to basic training. You do that first PT test, and I never run 2 miles, like actually thinking I had to do it for a test. I ran like the 800 in high school, 400 in college or whatever. And anyway, we was taking the PT test, and I took off. I took off like full speed, didn't know like, pace, nothing. And for, I want to say it was maybe like 8 laps. For 6.5 laps, I was just killing everybody. And then like I got tired. I got caught. And I ended up finished like 3rd or 4th or whatever. And I was like, man, like I should have beat everybody. I didn't know how to run. I didn't know how to run or whatever. And then I'll never forget the person or the person who finished first, which, should have been me had I done it right. They ended up saying like, oh, you're going to be the guidon bearer for the platoon in basic training. And that shit hurt me. And I was like, I will never lose ever again to this person or any other person. And so I enjoyed basic training. I enjoyed the physical aspects. I enjoyed learning about the Army, the shooting, the rucking, the land nav. And my drill sergeant saw that I was like doing well. And they saw I was like adapting. They were like, why'd you join the reserves? Like, why don't you think about infantry, or why don't you go like ranger or anything like that? And I was like, I didn't know. Like, my family's not from the military. I didn't really talk to anybody. I just talked to a recruiter. I took the first thing that I saw that made sense to me. And it started to think like, oh man, this might be able to become a career. And then they started talking about Ranger Regiment and other opportunities. And I was like, well, I'll finish AIT and I'll see if I can do, a RIP contract going into the reserves or whatever. And as I talked about, finished AIT, no issues, was like, top of the class, all that stuff. Went to my reserve unit, and they're like, great, like you're a PT stud, like all this great stuff. Like you said, you want to go to a Ranger Regiment, you owe us 2 years. And I was like, damn. And I don't know how much you've been around reservist units, but it was a little depressing. Like there was maybe like one other young dude like me who was like into physical fitness and trying to learn, and everybody else there was just like comfortable. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing like my NCO, he was a police officer in Chicago, so he was real influential in telling me like, hey, you can, do more. You can go to Ranger Regiment. You could become an officer. You can do all this. He was helping me like understand the ways I could like, progress. And I think roughly after being there for a little while, I met my company commander for the first time ever. And I'll never forget it because I was there for roughly two-ish years. And I never saw him again after that. Like, he had the job. He was there. He was the company commander. Like, this is the officer leading the unit. I never saw him again. I'll never forget his face. I'll never forget what he looked like. But I was like, I never see officers. Like, where are the officers? And that also stuck with me going forward. And I did the ROTC thing. And I went to Chicago State University. And Chicago has a large ROTC within their whole footprint. So they take all the schools in the city and they form like one, I guess you would call it, brigade or battalion. And again, I was good at it. And since I had been through basic training, I knew kind of my long-term goal of probably trying to go to regiment, trying to be an infantry officer, trying to be, Ranger qualified, trying to be airborne. I was like sleeping and breathing it outside of what I was doing in college. And I actually was so committed to it, like as I want to say a sophomore, mm-hmm. They gave me an airborne school slot, which they normally don't do for sophomores, but they wanted me to stay in the program. So I went to airborne school as a sophomore in college and as a cadet. Humbling experience because I had never been to Fort Benning, Georgia, and was dead of summer because everything with ROTC you do in the summer. Mm-hmm. And so coming from Chicago, like summer was like, and going to Georgia summer was like a whole culture shock in itself. And then recognizing that I wasn't even, that specialist that I was in the reserves. I was now a cadet, so I was below a private. So I had guard duty every week. The private was in charge of me because I was a cadet. Yeah. And, I just got through airborne school. And it was a good experience. I actually enjoyed it a lot. And it was, again, just that fuel to like, okay, like I could do this. Like, it's not hard. Like, all I have to do is prep and everything will be good to go. Yeah.
Now you mentioned that, like, you leaving high school, you couldn't pay for school and you didn't know the right way to do it. Just to back up a little bit, if you had to do it all over again, how would you have done it, like, the right way for, some of the guys that may find themselves in that specific situation?
No, and I'm glad you asked because I talk to my kids about it all the time. Of like, I guess we call it like generational growth in my family. Like, just because I didn't go to college, and just because no one before me in my family went to college, you don't have to be that way of learning those hard lessons. I would start off with talking to guidance counselors, and I say that very loosely because back in the day in Chicago, I guess I would say stereotype was that most males was either going to be like dead or in a gang by 19. So regardless of your grades, there was like a ceiling. And in high school, while I had good grades and I played sports, I probably didn't have the best attitude all the time. So when I did see my guidance counselor, she was like, "You're not going to really amount to anything, so I'm not going to waste my time with you." And again, this was a lady, I'm sure she dealt with a whole bunch of individual dudes and a individual like people who, didn't care about education, was only going to school so their parents didn't get in trouble or didn't really have a plan. So she kind of dismissed me. And at that point, without like family to really tell me anything, I kind of dismissed it myself. But, being on like the honor roll, taking the SAT and scoring well, I was like, oh yeah, like I don't have to depend on like sports or somebody else to necessarily tell me this. Like I can kind of read and find out or ask people. So I started asking people. But again, to your original question, I would start with the guidance counselor. Nowadays, you have the internet. You can research like your options. There's grants out there for individuals from what they call urban areas or lower income areas. There's scholarships. There's always financial aid. There's joining the military, obviously. That's not obviously for everybody. But you can research and find out ways to pay for school and make it an option. And even if it's not college, there's trade schools, technical schools, etc.
Now, do you think you would have done the academy routes if you knew about them, like your VMI, your West Point, your Citadel, and all of that?
I don't think I would have, only because, to your point, like when I went to IOBC, I didn't know what West Point was. I didn't know what VMI was, Citadel. And I happened to get in the summer class because of where I ranked OML-wise or whatever. So it was like 4 or 5 of us from like traditional colleges, and then all West Point dudes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to bash my West Point brothers, my fellow soldiers who are West Point, but that's all they talked about. That's all they lived. That's all they knew. So for the first 6 months of my time in IOBC and, starting my military career, all I heard about was plebe year, what they didn't get to do, and kind of that non-college experience. But I appreciated my college experience. I appreciated, the parties, the girls, the experiences, etc. A lot of West Pointers, not all, a lot of West Pointers you see in that first couple of years of their military career, they try to make up for what they missed in college, and that affects them as far as like being an officer. Because as you know, like
it's lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Those lines are pretty
exactly
black and white.
Exactly.
Like this is where you need to stand when it comes to certain boundaries that you shouldn't cross with hanging out with enlisted and doing all and everything. I agree 100%.
And it's hard when you're a young officer, young lieutenant or whatever, because you are getting money for the first time. You are to college, but like you said, you have to set that standard of like, I'm in charge. Like, yeah, I'm only 21, 22, but I have 40 people depending on me, 50 people depending on whatever that number is, and you're like, I have to be a leader. I may not know how, but I have to present, and then I have to learn on the job.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of them, it's like, I'm free for the first time, and they're trying to live it up, and it's like, I'm sorry, man, like you can't or you shouldn't. I guess I should say.
Some of them do, and their careers end up ending before it starts.
Fact.
Yeah. Now, because you're in the reserve unit, how did you learn about ROTC, and what made you want to go towards like the officer side as opposed to staying enlisted and just going active duty? How did that decision process develop?
It was mostly the senior NCO that I met in the reserves, the one I said was a police officer. He talked to me about it a little bit, and he told me there was options. And then, just being an SF dude, I was impatient. I was like, I'm not going to wait 2 years to basically go to the Ranger Regiment. And I already had some college, and I was like, okay, like I can finish this degree and then become an officer. Keep in mind, like I didn't know what an officer really did. I didn't know what it was. I just knew it was a faster route to being infantry, going to Ranger school, etc. And at that time, it was very rare, I say, for a black dude from Chicago to say, hey, I want to be infantry. So I figured my odds was going to be good as well because, I always joke that, somebody saw my application and was like, black dude, Chicago, want infantry? Like, oh, sign him up right. Like, put him at the top of the board. Like, exactly. Like, we got one. Like, everybody in the back high five. Like, recruiting, yes. Like, ugh. And oh
man. So now, how did the rest of ROTC go for you? Because you said you got airborne school. Mm-hmm. I think you were talking about the summer there. Mm-hmm. How was airborne school? Just because again, you're from Chicago and now you're doing like all this horse stuff. How was your first jump in the rest of airborne school, and then you can keep on with the ROTC experience.
So airborne school was outstanding, and it basically like finishing it, and you probably know it as well. Like it gave me that sense of achievement. My first jump, I would say it was better than I expected, only because I got to do the 150-foot tower, and that prepared me for essentially what it was going to be like. It's like out of however many people go to airborne school, maybe like 10 of us get to do it because it always break. Yeah. And doing that, I was like, oh, okay, like this ain't that bad. Like obviously you have to get over the fear of the unknown. Like, somebody else packed this bag on my back. I got to jump out of an airplane and I can't steer this thing. And I hope I land and hit the ground on the PLF, etc. But when the time came, I didn't think about it as much because I was like, and there's a theme throughout my entire life. I was like, man, I'm from Chicago. Like, I could do this. Like, I done dealt with crackheads. I done dealt with, poverty. I escaped the ghetto. Like, I did all this. I was like, I can do this. And that, like, just willed me through to, one, be nervous because it's okay to be nervous. But then to say, okay, like, I trust the training. And I was like, I can only die once. So, but did that, and I came back to ROTC. Big chested because I was like, oh, I got airborne school. Nobody else in ROTC really have it unless they was like a prior service individual. And then I continued to advance in ROTC. So I think after my sophomore year, early junior year, I got offered a scholarship to finish. And that took a lot of weight off of me because I was like, okay, I don't have to pay for school now. I was like, okay, ROTC is making sense because, now I can pay for school, which is, a secondary goal. And I'm still on that glide path to become an infantry officer, go to Ranger Regiment, yada, yada, yada. I did well on ROTC to the point where my senior year, I was the first black battalion commander for the fire battalion. And it was a big deal. Like it was a huge deal, which I didn't know because, I was just a student. But my NCO who ran my program at Chicago State, he pulled me to the side, after my my junior year, going into my senior year. And he was like, look, next year, you're going to be the battalion commander for the fire battalion. I'm just a college student. I'm like, okay, like it's a party later on. I got some girls I want to talk to. I got a car, like cool, whatever. He's like, no, he's like, you got to understand, like he's like, I had to fight for you. He's like, because you was undeniable as far as your performance, your leadership, your briefing or whatever. He's like, but Chicago State normally does not have, top leadership in the fire battalion. Because if you think about Chicago as a whole, Chicago State's not a known school. It's a small, little state school. Like DePaul was in my, DePaul was in my fire battalion. Loyola University, Chicago Med, like all these prestigious or well-known schools and higher education schools. And so a few people was like, oh, like it's just a token thing because, he was good enough. So they wanted to use him as a figurehead. And he was like, it's going to be the first time we have a black battalion commander. He's like, make no mistake. He's like, you earned it. He's like, you're on Dean's List with your grades. He's like, you maxing the PT test. You on the Ranger Challenge team. You went to airborne school. You're doing all the things. He's like, but he's like, unfortunately, he's like, you don't have to be undeniable. And I was like, undeniable? He's like, yeah. He's like, you're going to have to prove that you deserve to be there every day, whether you want to or not. And my NCO was black, so putting that together. And I didn't even think anything about it because all my ROTC friends was, white, Hispanic, Asian. Chicago was a melting pot. Yeah. So I didn't really think about it. And the first time, when I took over the battalion and I was in charge, like, I heard somebody say something, like the little whisper, the little talking shit of like, there's like, oh, like, like the only reason he made it is because his GPA high, but Chicago State's not that hard of a school to be in. And I'm from Chicago. I'm looking straight forward. I'm like,
came out.
Exactly. I was like, and I heard it. I was like, hey, I hear you talking. I was like, you said it to my face. I was like, so if you want to, debate it, I was like, okay, I got a 3.8 GPA. I was like, take out the education piece because you saying, I'm still, my education, my school is not as challenging as yours. I was like, I'm also doing a work study because I was a psychology major, so I had to do a work study. I'm part of that. I was like, also, like, I'm still beating you in PT. Like, I'm still beating you in the obstacle course. Like, I'm still briefing better than you. I'm still, the captain of the Ranger Challenge team. I was like, how many of those excuses you gonna keep on making? And it was one of the first times that I heard somebody say, well, it's like, well, that's not that hard for you. Like, you just naturally athletic. And I was like,
you got those fast twists.
Exactly. I was like, what does it have to do? Like, I still had to work. Like, I was like, what you see is, like easy. And I made the reference of like, I grew up in Chicago. I was like, I grew up without a car. And I was like, the majority of my life, I walked everywhere. I was like, so you know why I could ruck, like forever? I was like, because I walked. We was too poor for a car. I was like, so like naturally all the things I dealt with growing up kind of led me to be good in the Army. Not intentionally, but I had to survive. I had to get things done.
So now, how did you take that specific incident? Because like you and I both know, like, well, you and I, like, we don't give a shit about any of that, right?
Yeah.
As far as, and a lot of the kids that I speak to right now, the first thing I do, especially if they look like you and I, like, I immediately just debunk the racial thing. I'm like, if you're going towards this space, like, change that mindset.
Yeah.
Like, don't even think about race, because once you get to that point, no one gives a shit. But you're dealing with it, out of, well, you're still in college, and of course you grew up in Chicago, which, like, you're not the man that you are now. Like, how did you handle that aspect of it? Like, how was that mindset? Did you still want to join the military, or did you think you was gonna have to deal with it some more? Like, what did that experience do to you?
Well, again, growing up in Chicago, that wasn't my first incident of, I guess, veiled racism or whatever. And it actually wasn't from like a white classmate. It was from a Hispanic classmate. So I thought that was funny. I was like, basically I thought we was on the same team. I was like, but for the most part, my fellow classmates, white, Asian, black, etc., they was all congratulatory. They were all like, they're all like, hey, you deserve it. Like, you killing it, you crushing it. And, like, as like, even though like all racism isn't, I guess, prevalent, it is out there, and it's never stopped me in the military. It's never like held me back. There's always going to be somebody who's ignorant, but as like Cat Williams said in that special a long time ago, like, if you don't got a few haters, you're not doing something right. So yeah. I was like, hey, like, hate on me, like, fuel me, because like, I know, like, you're a little envious. You want to be me, like, and I say that because he did want to go infantry. He did want to go to airborne school. Yeah. He didn't have those opportunities. So I don't know how much of that was jealousy or how much of that was like he thought he was just better or whatever. But it was just fuel. And as you know, for your military career, like, I've run off of fuel. Like, somebody doubting me or somebody thinking I can't do something. I was like, it's like, okay, like, that's even better. Like, it's going to be even that much sweeter when I'm successful.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there's a point in there that needs to be taken out, to that racism isn't necessarily black or white. It can be, from the same race, from similar race, because of the jealousy, right? The jealousy factor. So I'm glad you cleared that up. Before we move on, like, what exactly does a battalion chief, or like, what exactly is that position?
It's mostly figurehead for the most part, but you essentially think of it as, in ROTC, you might as well call it, though it's not, you are acting almost as like a platoon sergeant or a sergeant major. Like, the cadre are briefing me on intent, and then I'm, leading everything, or I'm briefing orders, or I'm running PT, or it was mostly ceremonial, as in like, hey, this is how we are delegating kind of the OML, kind of the, based off everybody, you the number one. And it wasn't even like a huge thing to me at the time, just because I was like, this is just a short stop. And my good friend, he was actually a prior service infantry dude, white dude. He was a redhead. I used to mess with him all the time. But halfway through the school year, so I was the battalion commander, he was the sergeant major. And then halfway through the school year, we switched. He became the battalion commander, and then I was the sergeant major. So, in my mind, I was thinking more about like long term, because I still had like ILBC, and I talked to one of my good instructors, he's still a good friend of mine now, NCO. He was from the 82nd. So he was like, hey, you doing all this now, be a college student, enjoy. He's like, but you want to be infantry. He's like, you got to go, I'd already been to airborne school, but he's like, you got to go to Ranger school. He's like, and you got to pass Ranger school. He's like, otherwise, you're not an infantry officer. And, that's that old school mind, but I ate it up. I drank that Kool-Aid hard. I was like, oh man, like I got to go, infantry, I can do all that. I was like, Ranger school, I don't control that. I got to pass Ranger school. I got to think about Ranger school. And, I was like reading 7-8 every time I use the bathroom. I'm studying the Ranger handbook, learning the Ranger Creed. Like, and granted, I haven't even graduated college yet. I'm like, okay, like, in my other NCO from Chicago State, he was a tanker actually. What he said to me, I just never forgot. He was like, you have to be undeniable. And, it's just because you're going to be looked at in a certain way. And I was like, okay, I got to know 7-8 backwards and forwards. I got to know the fucking Ranger handbook backwards and forwards. My PT got to be on point. I have to get better at land nav. And I say better because coming from Chicago, my land nav was shit starting off. Like, I can get through an urban area, no problem. I could tell you how to get, around the block, through a park, whatever. But starting off, like ROTC put me in the woods, I was lost. And I spent a bunch of days lost. And so I had to humble myself and ask somebody who was better than land nav, like, hey man, like, what are you doing? And next time we do partners, can I partner with you? And that was my stepping stone. It was a good friend of mine. I won't say his name, but we called ourselves the Dirty Deuce, because every time like we'd team up in land nav, and like I would shadow him in the beginning, then I'd be like, all right, like let me take the lead, and if I'm doing something wrong, tell me. And I got lost, and I learned, and got lost again. And I learned more and more, and then by the time I graduated college, my land nav was decent, but it wasn't where it needed to be, long term. But I at least felt confident, which I didn't starting off. Like land nav humbled me. I spent some time lost in the woods. Right? So,
yeah, I think we've all been there. And me from New York, it was pretty similar. So now, did you end up getting? Well, clearly you got infantry. Now, did you end up going to Ranger Bat, or how did everything else develop once you finished ROTC?
So I finished ROTC, and I'll tell the story of I don't know if they do it anymore, but you go to used to go to JBLM for like summer camp or whatever, and I found out about truly they let you, like, they teach you, or you go to like a booth and you see all the branches or whatever. And anyway, I just knew I wanted to be infantry, so I went to the infantry booth first. I was like, I'll go to engineers or tankers or whatever, because I have to. But and I'll just tell you this story, like segues to the whole thing. And I went to the infantry booth, and it was just a bunch of fellow cadets, only black dude in the room, not an issue to me or whatever. And we're waiting around. Anyway, a dude comes in, got a maroon beret, 82nd, huge dip in his mouth or whatever. And like everybody kind of just like smoking and joking. And he's like, hey, if infantry's not your first choice, get the fuck out right now. People laughed or whatever. It was like, ha, 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 ha. Dead face. And this is a Catholic. He's like, no, I'm serious. If infantry's not your first choice, get the fuck out right now. And like the whole room went quiet. And I was like, oh yeah, this for me. And like you could see people was like apprehensive. They was like, do I leave or do I stay? And I was like, okay, like I like this mentality. I like the straightforwardness of infantry. And anyway, that got me to the mindset of going to ILBC, etc. So I graduate. I did go bar recruiting for a little while in Chicago. That's where you stay in the area and you advertise ROTC, etc. Because I was a summer class, like I said before. And again, didn't know anything about Georgia, didn't know anything about infantry, didn't know anything as far as like what I had read, what people had told me, etc. And was branch detailed MI again with infantry. So I went to ILBC in the summer of 2005, I want to say. And like I told you before, I didn't know that those summer classes are normally like high West Point classes. So I get there, I had my order, so I knew I was staying at 3rd ID, which was I was in what they call the Bastard Brigade, which is a 115th Infantry. It's been the colors have been furrowed, or what's it called? Colors been wrapped now, so they're no longer there. But I got an apartment because I was like, oh, I'm gonna be here. Like, there's no reason for me to be in the barracks. Like, I've lived a college student life. I've been in dorm rooms. I can get an apartment, and I started to basically eat, sleep, breathe just ILBC. Like, I learned a lot. I always had my ruck packed. I always had my stuff ready. My apartment had like a futon, a TV, and I think a table, because everything I did was just focused on infantry. So
now, when you say you got, because you said branch detail, could you go over that real quick? So you were
So for officers,
were you assigned a branch or like?
Yeah. So for officers, and what they don't tell you is there's kind of think of it as like a reverse pyramid on how they need lieutenants versus how they need like senior officers. So infantry, armor, most of the combat arms are high density, high field type of MOS branches. So they need a lot of first lieutenants, second lieutenants. So what it is essentially you have a higher or control branch, I guess I will call it, which is MI. So overall, MI controlled me. Later on in my career, after I was a second lieutenant and I was promoted to captain, I would automatically be transferred to MI. But during my time as a second lieutenant and first lieutenant, I would basically be a combat arms officer. It was a way to like get experience and get that large pot of second lieutenants and first lieutenants, and then have them take that experience to their combat support branches or whatever. You can try to opt to stay in a branch once you're in it, but most of the time it's not successful, just because, again, that triangle is, hey, we need a bunch of, first lieutenants, second lieutenants, and then once we get to captains, we need a little less. Majors, we need a little less. So it's just a way to, one, get experience, keep the combat arms fully staffed, and then
spread the love of combat to all the other non-combat. Okay.
So long term, the Army's plan would have been for me to, get all that experience as an infantry officer, take it over to MI, and be able to provide that intelligence from a ground force commander type of point of view, from a lieutenant who's had that ground experience.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense.
But in my mind, I never planned on making it to MI, so I was never really worried about it. I was like, I'm infantry. That's all that matters.
Gotcha.
And so did ILBC, enjoyed that, learned a lot. Again, continue to just study 7-8, Ranger Handbook, get my PT together, get my land nav together, understand how to pack a ruck, understand how to brief, understand how to lead, like listen to the officers that ran ILBC, but also more along the lines of listening to the NCOs. And I say that because with my reserve background and my enlisted background, I knew what that kind of life was like. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't discrediting the officers, but to an extent, I was like, these NCOs that are kind of that are assigned to us, they've had that experience with the officers. They know what they like, they know what they don't like. They have the experiences of good and bad officers. So I used a lot of that to shape, like, okay, like this is how I need to understand, like, the enlisted side once I'm in charge. This is kind of how I need to separate myself or include myself. Knowing those boundaries that you talked about of this is how I need to be as an officer, and I start to kind of shape that just because I didn't know what I didn't know.
Yeah, and just for the folks watching, IOBC is infantry officer
basic course,
right? So coming right out of ROTC, that's what you have to go through, and based on your branch, you might not go to IOBC. If you're an armor officer, then you'll go to some different.
During that time, it was AOBC, Armor Officer Base Course, or EOBC. This was before BOLIC, before all of that. Gotcha. This was you went to your specific branch and you learned it immediately. Now I think they used to have BOLIC, and then you go to, IOBC, AOBC, whatever your school is. And BOLIC was that basic officer leaders course, I want to say. Mm-hmm. So it kind of helped everybody get on the same playing field, and then you'll go learn your specialty at your actual branch.
So now at this point, are you thinking of making the military a career, or because I know initially it was a way to pay for school, and if you are, like, why do you think that is? Because clearly you didn't have any anybody else that served in the military, but it's like every generation always has one. Like, what made you want to, I guess, serve?
So, like, I can't lie and say it was like patriotism or anything like that. Obviously, 9/11 had happened, and so I was already in during 9/11. So, in my mind, I was always training to go to war. So I'd say there was a splash of like patriotism, but my overall goal was like experience and like just seeing or learning and then experiencing like the world, experience opportunities. Growing up in Chicago, before I went to college, before I joined the Army, my world was, the 4x4 block that I lived in Chicago. I read about places, or I read about or learned about places on TV, but in my mind, I didn't know how I was going to get to them or how I was going to experience them. Joining the military opened my eyes to some of the opportunities that were out there, some of the things I could take advantage of, and then just some of the experiences that I could have. Again, I wasn't like you said, it wasn't like, oh, my family served for 100 years, so I need to be the next in line. It was more of, hey, I want the experience. I want to take advantage of everything that I can do or I could learn in the military. And also, there's a little bit of, patriotism. Like, there's a little bit of like, oh, I guess get back from, 9/11. So.
Gotcha. So now you mentioned third ID. How was that stay for you? Like your, because you had to do PL, was it XO, and then company command. Like, how was your time spent there?
So I'd say, third ID, third ID was good and bad. I say that because once I finished ILBC, because I was mechanized, after I went to Ranger School and graduated that, and I was mechanized, you had to go through like the mechanized leaders course, did that. But I joined the mechanized infantry, which I didn't know anything about. A little bit of me, part of me was like disappointed because I was like, my first choice was 82nd. My second choice was 101st. And I was like, like, why didn't I get those? I was still a top performer. I went straight through Ranger School. I, did everything I was supposed to do. But so I was a little bit like, oh, I'm going to the land of mech. Like, somebody somewhere doesn't think I could be an infantry officer. I was mistaken. And I say that because third ID opened my eyes to all the benefits of being mech. And one of those was when, again, I graduated all those schools. I went straight to Iraq and took over the platoon. Like, there was no, like, I trained up with them. There was no, like, oh, I know any of these dudes beforehand. I went straight there. Me and a good buddy, we went through what you would guess I call the pre-training before deployment. We walked into the battalion commander's office in Iraq, in Fob McKenzie, Iraq. I'll never forget it. And the battalion commander, who's actually now General Gary Brito, he was like, yo, nice to meet y'all. Glad y'all here. He was like, hey, I just need both of you to make a right face. And he was checking to make sure we had Ranger tabs. Mm-hmm. I had a Ranger tab. My buddy didn't. He was like, you go into the platoon that's doing all the fighting. You go into the area in the platoon that's not doing all the fighting. And I was like, that's it? Like, like I did all this work and it's basically I got a Ranger tab. And I was like, glad I got a Ranger tab. But
so now, because I've always been curious about this, because I'm not a Ranger dude, but you are. But amongst officers, it seems to be pretty prevalent. Like, why do you think such a weight is put on that tab, specifically for Ranger officers?
Because it's a leadership school, and it's basically a school that, if you've been or if you kind of know or understand of it, you can at least attest to somebody having, I guess a specific fortitude or a specific drive and determination. Obviously, I know you're a sapper, and I still tolerate you and appreciate you. But as you know, even in sapper school, like, there are great men, and and I went during the time there were no females, but Ranger School was a leadership school where I learned a lot about myself, and then I learned a lot about truly like leading individuals that have no buy-in, that have no commitment to me, that, we all have to do the mission. And ROTC, you're leading your fellow officers. Everybody's trying to get a good grade or do whatever. You have a camaraderie, you hang out, you do a lot of stuff at night. At Ranger School, I'm with you for hopefully only 61 days. And, I'm trying to get you to do what I need you to do through, my presence, my ability to be a good teammate, a good leader, etc. So you're learning some of those general or unknown aspects of being an officer and being a leader. And plus, it gives you credibility because and you dealt with a lot of like officers coming in, a lot of lieutenants. You get some that have like a big head that know everything, and you get some that are like humble and like going to learn, and then you get kind of that in between. How much, I'll say, gravitas does it have if I come in and I know you're an engineer. If I came in with a sapper tab, you're like, okay, like you may not know anything, but I know that you went to a school that everybody says is, put you at this level or gives you that start. And that's kind of what Ranger School was for all officers, or is for all officers. It's that first taste, that first start, and that proving that, hey, you can be more than just somebody who got a college education and who was put in charge.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now you get your platoon. Was your buddy pissed off that he got to go hang out with?
He was a little pissed off. And he's like, fuck, I should have fucking went back to Ranger School. And at the time, it's that choice that every officer has to make, because he could have like tried to go back to Ranger School, but then it would have delayed him and he would have missed the deployment. Yeah. And as you know, like, we were lucky to be in a generation where deployments were prevalent, where I knew I was deploying when I joined the Army. You knew you were deploying. Mm-hmm. And for most of us, not all, for most of us, that's like your Super Bowl, right? You don't want to practice all year and never make it to the playoffs and never make it to the Super Bowl. And I understand why a lot of people basically, are upset or disappointed that they don't get to the deployment. But anyway, so got there, took over the platoon, took it over from the other PL. It was just the end of his time. And first thing, it was my whole story with Third ID is my first experience in Third ID was two things. One was my platoon sergeant was a country dude with a hard Texas accent, but he was like a 6'4" Asian dude. And my second experience was my sister platoon was the platoon of Sergeant First Class Alwyn Cashe. Mm-hmm. And Cashe's story or whatever. And first thing he did when he met me, he's like, what you doing here? I was like, I'm taking over the platoon, taking over First Platoon. And he's like, First Platoon? And he was like, you ain't taking over First Platoon. I was like, oh, no, my bad. I'm taking over Second Platoon. He's like, you ain't know what platoon you taking over. He's like, goddamn Chicago. He's like, I done read your file. I know what you're here for. And I was like, I don't even know you. Like what is it? He's like, Chicago. He's like, let me tell you this. He's like, I'm infantry. He's like, I've been around a bunch of times. He's like, I've seen about 5 black PLs. He's like, my PL that I have now, which is actually a good friend of mine. He's like, and you. He's like, I don't think you're going to make it. I was like,
what the fuck?
Like, I just got here. Like, I'm fresh. I mean, fresh. Like, my DCU still fresh. Everything, still brand new. And I didn't know it at the time, but that was just his way of, like, testing me to, like, see how I was going to react. And I was like, I survived Chicago. I was like, I could tell you this. I was like, my first, gunfight is not going to be here in Iraq. I was like, so I think I'll be okay. He's like, we'll see. But
was it that deployment that he ended up dying? Or?
Yeah, it was that deployment he ended up dying.
Gotcha.
But again, he was in a sister platoon. So, and again, great dude. We could get to that a little with all the stories, true. But I took over, and my platoon was a good mix of mostly white, 1-2 black dudes, a few Hispanic, my Asian platoon sergeant from Texas, and
truly a melting pot.
Exactly, and then me. So it was a good experience. I learned a lot from my platoon sergeant. I learned a lot from my squad leaders, from my team sergeants, and my E5. Excuse me. And I came in just in that first, and that okay, I have to learn everybody. I have to learn personalities. I have to learn what kind of motivates everybody. And in combat, you don't have as much time as when you're in garrison to say okay, let's wait 30 days, then we're gonna change things. after like a week, I was like, okay, like I see a lot of stuff we was doing from the OPL. Like I'm not bashing him. I'm not saying it was right or wrong, but talk to my platoon sergeant. I was like, these are the things I think we need to change. And I was like, and I'm not saying it from the point of, you were doing it wrong or like this it isn't successful. I was like, I think you guys, and I think they have been there for maybe like 5 or 6 months already. So I was like, it's more of a complacency and you've gotten lazy because y'all have been successful. I was like, I'm coming in with fresh eyes and I don't want to change everything. But I was like, my biggest thing and my biggest fear is like, I don't want to have to call anybody who's here, mother, father, brother, sister, and tell them that, hey, I was lazy or scared to make changes and I didn't. And my platoon sergeant respected me for it. And he was like, no, he's like, I appreciate you saying it. He's like, we've been here for a while. We've been successful. We haven't lost anybody. We haven't, we've hit IEDs. We've had like gunfights, but, not on the fact of saying like we're comfortable. He's like, but we successful. So why would we change? And he's like, let's look at the changes you want to make. And then we'll talk about them like going forward. And we just had that like good conversation, that good relationship. I recognized where I was as a PO coming in mid-deployment. I recognized the experience and like the gravitas he had as a platoon sergeant, like how the soldiers looked up to him, the power he had, like not only in the platoon, but with the other platoons and then in the company, how much he was respected. And I just leaned into that to like learn from him and then also, still be in charge. Yeah. And that delicate balance because you can't just come in, kick in the door like, all right, I'm here. I got a Ranger tab. I'm in charge, So, and we were extremely successful. And third ID, my initial part of third ID was great. And as you alluded to, midway through my time there, we started seeing a lot of the I'm forgetting the name of the IEDs we call with the copper rounds.
The EFPs?
Yeah, EFPs. Mm-hmm. We started seeing a lot of the EFPs.
This was what year?
This was 2006.
Yeah, okay. So,
the biggest incident, obviously, that we had with the EFP was the Sergeant Cashe incident. And
if you don't mind, just speak to that because I don't think his story is out there enough as far as the bravery and the shit that he did that day. So if you don't mind, I know this is a little small podcast on YouTube, but I think his story is fucking amazing. So if you don't mind, just shedding light on what actually took place that day, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, and I guess I'll set the scene for everybody's perspective. This was back in the day in Iraq when we were all on fire bases, and you were on a fire base.
Yeah. And
it was one of those fire bases where there was only, there's essentially 2 ways in, 2 ways out. But for the most part, 90% of the time you use that main area in. Our fob was located in a desert, and we had a straight shot to kind of the main area in town or whatever. Sergeant Cashe and his platoon, they were essentially going out on a standard night patrol. Nothing, that we hadn't done hundreds of times, period. We're mechanized, so normally we're rolling 4 Bradleys. And by the SOPs, normally for mechanized, it's normally that either the PLs in front or the team sergeants in the front vehicle. So you got 4 Bradleys, all in a row, on a row, going spaced out, obviously for security purposes, for dispersion of fire, etc. As the story goes, and I got this from my PL buddy, he wanted to lead the way out. I think it was his turn or whatever, and just for some reason, I think Sergeant Cashe had volunteered that night to lead the way out, and like I said, we have that long stretch of road that goes from our fire base. This was File McKenzie, so it was. My Iraq geography is horrible. I'm trying to remember the area. I could look it up, but I've done so much stuff. I don't remember Iraq areas like that just because I don't want to be that person that tell you, oh, I was in this area. Like I served like this. But anyway. We're leaving the fire base, and it's a long stretch, maybe a mile road that we take out, again, 90% of the time. And we had done some watching of that road with our scouts, with, the engineers clearing it, etc. And this night, they were out heading on that road to town. And as I said, I was QRF. and they hit EFP, Sergeant Cashe's vehicle specifically. What most people don't know about the Bradley is that it is a extreme fighting vehicle, and at this time we had like the reactive armor on it. You have, I don't know how many rounds, tens of thousands of like HE rounds, armor piercing rounds, all either in the floor of the Bradley or like stacked up on the sides. But because it's a combat vehicle, the Bradleys are made to burn essentially quickly. And so, with the EFP, it's essentially a molten shape charge IED that's kind of directional. And at the time, the tactics of the enemies were to essentially target toward kind of the, I guess I'll say, not necessarily the gas tanks, but just in those more damaging areas of our armored vehicles, so our tanks, Bradleys, etc. Long story short, Sergeant Cashe hit that IED, and the story as it was told to me is that the vehicle, caught on fire, and the back of the Bradley, which is a ramp, was kind of knocked off the hinge. So the Bradley, it's a great fighting vehicle, but it's a goddamn death trap if you ever get caught in it. So they were able to kind of get the troop door open, which is like, if I was painting a picture, this is the ramp, and there's like a little like port door that you can like kind of open and get out. They're able to get some people out of that, and Sergeant Cashe, covered in gas, essentially was like basically pulling people out, going back in for people. Like he escaped out of the Bradley after it had been hit, covered in gas, covered essentially, covered in a flammable liquid. He went back, I don't know how many times, so I wasn't there, to help try and save as many as possible. And he eventually got, I think, almost everybody that was trapped in the vehicle out. I don't remember the exact number, but he was safe. He could have stood on the side, but he eventually caught on fire himself, obviously, after basically trying to get all of his soldiers out of his damaged Bradley. I think he went back the last time to try to get the interpreter, but the interpreter was in what we call kind of the hellhole, which is in between the turret and where the driver is. And from what I understand, either it was no getting to him because of the heat, or maybe rounds were cooking off, or maybe at that point it was just impossible for him to see, or maybe he had been sustained his injuries. We rode on QRF, and night in Iraq, there's no street lights. No. So coming out the gate, all I see is a giant giant ball, and I'm like, oh shit. And we basically tried to speed up as much as we could. My good friend, again, the PL, they had already started to medevac. They started whatever. They got, Sergeant Cashe, along with obviously help, they got everybody out. And I want to say we ended up having 3 or 4 individuals who eventually died because they succumbed to their wounds, but also Sergeant Cashe eventually died because of his wounds. Because of the wounds he sustained. Yeah. And seeing that as a young PL, and this was our first, I guess I'd say, mass casualties, I understood the gravity of it, but then when they told me, like, oh no, like, he was clear when the Bradley first got hit, he went back in. And I was thinking to myself, I was like, that's some next level shit that, I don't know what I would do in the moment. And I hope, I would do that. But, like, he did it. And he knew about the Bradley. He was a Mike Goff, which is a master gunner for the mechanized world, i.e. they know everything about the ballistics of a vehicle. They know everything about, how vehicles, mechanized vehicles work. Yeah. So he knew what he was running into. And to do that, numerous times, like, that just showed not only was he, a great leader, but he cared about his soldiers, because you don't care. You don't do that,
No, you don't do that unless you give a shit. Yeah. And for that, he earned the Medal of Honor. So that's awesome.
Eventually. Because when it first happened, they were trying to put him in for, I want to say, the Medal of Honor, but I think he got downgraded to a Silver Star. And just to go off on the tangent of that, like, the military is great in a lot of aspects, like, because of the people and the experiences, but some of our systems and some of our rules and regulations are ridiculous. That happened to Cashe when I was either second lieutenant or first lieutenant. Like, he finally got the Medal of Honor when I was a lieutenant colonel. Yeah, like took 20 some years, like basically the beginning of my career and the end of my career. Like my entire career, they have been fighting to try to get him that Medal of Honor. And thank goodness he finally got it, and he got the recognition he deserves. And more people like know and hear his story. But unfortunately, and just like and I know, like it could have just been another actions of a brave individual who got, and I'm gonna say, a check the block Silver Star, which that's not a Silver Star action right there.
No, absolutely. So now you go through that deployment. How did you discover SOF, and what made you want to go towards that selection and then Q course and all of that?
So went through that deployment. Successfully finished my platoon time. Became the XO of that same company, and then we got alerted for the surge. For people that don't know, the surge, it was essentially a 15-month deployment. They were stop lossing people. I had kind of plans to get out because I had third ID had soured me some. Mostly the leadership, not the soldiers, not like the mechanized life, but the leadership, and I'll get to that. And so I went back to Iraq my second time as an XO for the same company.
What year was this?
This is 2007, 2008-ish.
Okay. Yeah, because I got caught in that 15 months.
Exactly.
I did 15 months over at Spiker.
Yep.
From 07 to 08.
So I was at Spiker too, and we ended up being but I was at a COP most of my entire time on that surge. Well, most of my time in third ID, and because I ended up leaving while I was there. But anyway, so third ID, great experience. The second trip with the NCOs, I started to have a lot of disagreements or not believe in like my officers. And I say that from the fact of like, it wasn't all officers, but I started to come to the realization that, and everybody knows this, is like the military doesn't select leaders. It gives you an opportunity to lead and then see if you are a leader. And we were about maybe 6 months into that deployment. And I was dealing with a company commander who, he was living in the shadow of a previous company commander, and he was trying to like live up to this standard, and like, he wanted to be a golden boy. He wanted to be in the circle, but the battalion commander just didn't like him like that. So he gave his platoon, a different area. He gave him, the not the main effort, but the supporting effort. And I like saw it from the point of being XO. It was just like eating him up every time, like he didn't get the main effort mission. And I'm like, and I had enough of it at one point, and this is when I knew I was probably going to get in trouble. My first sergeant was like basically talking to him. He's like, "Hey, sir," he's like, "We got this." He's like, "The battalion commander wants to do this. Like, let's do this. Like, we gonna knock this out." He's like, "I trust this platoon. I trust this platoon. Like, we got this." He's like, "They may not know we the number one effort, but like, we gonna treat this supporting effort like it's the number one thing." And like my company commander was like, "No, like, they personally against me, blah 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 blah." Just like this woe is me thing. And I'll never forget it because my first sergeant, he talked to me about it later. I was like, "Sir," I was like, "you got to get over this shit." I was like you have, whatever it was, 150 people depending on you to lead right now. Like we are at whatever COP we were at the time. I was like, every day we going out, we dealing with gunfire. Every day we going out, we dealing with IEDs. Like they looking to you to be a leader. Like don't worry about being number one with the battalion commander. Worry about being number one with the company. Like this is what you need to be. Like I'm tired of hearing this. I'm tired of hearing it. And my first sergeant gave me a look. He's like, "Sir," he's like, "it needs to be said." He's like, "but not like that." And I was like, "No," I was like, "I'm sorry." I was like, because and a little bit of backstory on that. Like before we went to Iraq, the second time when we were staging to go out towards Fob Spiker and then set up comps, we were receiving our Bradleys. So we had when you receive the Bradleys in country, you have to basically load everything up, get them prepared. Anyway, and I forget where we were, but in the staging area we received our Bradleys. We had a soldier die because he got pinned between two Bradleys. There's basically, he was ground guiding a Bradley, and you're never supposed to ground guide in between two vehicles. He was basically ground guiding, his buddy was driving, and the gas pedal got stuck.
Oh shit!
And it pinned him between the two Bradleys. As the XO, I was already out there on the line, taking inventory of vehicles, and somebody called me and they told me what was going on. And so I run over there, and like he's basically alive because the Bradleys had, basically pinned him together. The leadership had all came, but like everybody knew, like once we move this Bradley, he's gonna die. And like at that point in time, like I remember thinking, I was like, all right, like this is where, this is before all the conversation I just talked about with my company commander. I was like, this is where he's gonna step up. This is where he's gonna give soldiers the right words, or he's gonna say or do what needs to be said. And his response to not only the soldier dying, but also, him being killed by his friend in the Brad accident, and then his response to the company, in my opinion, was lacking. And I say that from the point of like, he didn't take time to acknowledge that it was an accident and it was going to affect the morale of the company, but it was something that they needed to bounce back for, don't forget, but hold and, make an awareness of like, hey, we need to be better. We need to, tighten up everything we're doing going forward. Yeah. It was more of I felt like he was treated like an inconvenience because, he wanted to be a company commander. He was ready to lead his troops out the gate and lead them to the FOB, lead them to the cops, And, that kind of lost me on the leadership, on him as a leader. Then I dealt with some stuff with the surge where a lot of my leadership had been at West Point, or they had been teaching. So they didn't have combat experience. So they were doing, this was their first combat experience. And, I remember we were getting ready to go to a peninsula area. And again, I told you we were mech. At this point, we were combined arms. So they took a Bradley company and they would intermingle like a platoon of tanks. Mm-hmm. So everybody had combined companies, and we're going into a peninsula. And we were doing the brief to the battalion commander. And I was talking to, I want to say my first sergeant as well. And I was like, hey, I got to say something first. And I was like, we're trying to take a battalion's worth of mechanized vehicles to include support trucks, gas trucks, into a peninsula. I was like, let that sink in. Like, we're going to put, mechanized all in the peninsula. There's only one road in, one road out. And
you've experienced this
before.
Exactly.
And I'm like, so we're about to go into, like, the world's worst ambush or whatever. And this was during a time when we used to do, like, the big sand table. Like, they block off an area. They have the whole map. Everybody talks about what their company's doing. And we got to the part where they were like, are there any questions or concerns? And I was like, sir, I have one concern. I was like, and this is just from my perspective. I understand we may have like ways to mitigate it, or we may be thinking about ways to mitigate it. I was like, but if I understand correctly, we're going to have, and I counted however many companies and of vehicles, and I counted all the vehicles. I was like, we're going to have X number of vehicles in a peninsula. And it's one way in and one way out. I was like, I feel like we're going to set ourselves up for an impossible situation where we're basically going to be canalized in, and then we won't be able to, if there's a casualty or a vehicle down, we won't be able to get ourselves out. And I'll never forget it because I wasn't disrespectful. I was just, one, concerned about my platoon, concerned about myself as well. And he was like, oh, no. He's like, no. He's like, you're just a captain. Stay in the captain's place. It's not going to happen. I was like, sir, my last deployment, I was like, I understand this isn't the last deployment. You never say, like, I was like, I just know the effect of this many vehicles in one spot, how hard it is to turn around. What happens if a track vehicle goes down? What happens if a wheel vehicle goes down? What happens if we have a casualty? Just like this huge, like, ripple effect from, these types of things. I was like, do we have a contingency on how we're going to recover a tank if it goes down in the front, or a Bradley if it goes down and we're canalized in? And I'll never forget, because the battalion commander, the 3 and the XO, they kind of looked at each other, and then they looked at me and they looked at my company commander, and they were like, that's never going to happen. And I was like, sir, I understand. Humor me. I was like, I understand. I was like, we will have overwhelming force. Like, I understand. I was like, something in me just don't sit right that we're going to do this, And I was like, based off of my very limited experience, I understood I was a captain. I understood and I was a brand new captain, had just pinned or whatever. And I understood like what I was saying, and I was saying it in front of the entire battalion. And, I was like, sir, I wouldn't say it if it wasn't something to be considered. Anyway, I was dismissed. And that same company commander that I told you I had an issue with, the battalion commander basically told him that, hey, we don't want TO to go on this mission because basically what happened on the sand table. And I was like, okay. I was like, that's fine, sir. And I told my company commander, I was like, but sir, I was like, but what I'm telling you is a realistic problem. Like, oh, sorry, it could be a realistic problem. Like, and if it happens, like, we need to have a plan for it. And I just walked him through, like, from what I'd seen the last deployment, we did that, and the secondary, tertiary things, like, the company needed to be prepared for. Long story short, I was left back at the TOC that day. I'm listening to everything on the radio. And, of course, like, you know, and I'm not saying like I'm like fucking Nostradamus or anything. It's just combat, and you know, Murphy's Law. Mm-hmm. What you plan for, or the most dangerous the most dangerous course of action is going to happen. We had a tank go down, we had a HIMMET go down, and we had a casualty. And again, they were on this peninsula. So they basically couldn't fight their way out. They couldn't retreat. They couldn't retrograde. They couldn't do anything. So I think they took 1 or 2, maybe 3 casualties that day. I'm hearing all this on the radio, and I'm thinking to myself, the best way I could, I said, we at least need to plan for this. I didn't say it was going to happen. I said, we need to plan for this. I wasn't like, I'm the best dude ever. I wasn't like, you know, I'm the smartest person ever. I was just saying, hey, common sense. If this happens, like, it's going to be the worst situation. And I'm just listening to all the chat on the radio. I'm listening to everything going wrong. And I'm thinking to myself, like, because I spoke up, I'm not there right now. And I was like, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Like, did I mess up because I could have been on the ground helping, or I could have helped, you know, like mitigate or make certain none of this happen? Or I was like, or was it going to happen and like somebody should have listened to me? Anyway, the peninsula wasn't that far from our top. So they took those 3 casualties. Again, I'm silent on third ID at this time. They hadn't planned properly. So when they took the 3 casualties, they put them in body bags. We did this operation in the middle of the summer. They were on that peninsula for maybe 6 or 7 hours. So you know what happens to a body in a body bag at that time. So halfway through that, somebody was like, oh shit, like we have bodies in 3 body bags for X amount of hours. Let's put ice on them. So now, after a body's been rapidly heated in black bags, they threw a bunch of ice in there. And the nearest cop was our cop. So I got a call on the radio of like, hey, like TO, we have 3 KIAs coming back. We need you to take care of them. And I basically just been storming until, you know, the mission was over. Yeah. And, you know, me and the few other individuals there, we had to like receive them. And like I saw those 3 bodies and I was just like, is this just fucking inept leadership? Like, or was this like ego? I was like, or am I just in the wrong place and standards are starting to lack and things starting to change? So at that point, that's when I started to think like, I need to start thinking about getting out. I was like, because if I stay in the military, I have how much more time of people being put in charge of me because the Army says you get to be a leader. Yeah. And I was honest about that. And so, like I said, I just been promoted to captain. So in their mind, they were thinking like, oh, like, you know, like you gonna come back to third ID, you're gonna be the next great thing in third ID. And I started to talk to my new company commander, and I was like, sir, I think I'm gonna get out. Like, you know, I've seen enough. Like, I'm not like necessarily impressed with the leaders. Like, and I'm kind of scared for like what's gonna happen going forward. And he's like, oh no, he was a Ranger Regiment guy. He was like, no, he's like, it gets better. He's like, just stay the course. And so the final incident that broke the straw was that company commander, he had gone on what was essentially a KLE, a key leader engagement at the time in Iraq. And I was left in charge back of the fire base. We got attacked. We had like, you know, our perimeter up. We did everything we were supposed to do. No issues. But while I was in the TOC, just basically commanding and controlling, somebody had essentially an AD in like our foyer area. It was an all concrete area. The final straw with third ID, my company commander was off doing a KLE, key leader engagement with somebody in Iraq. And go ahead.
So now, before we jump to the final straw, after that incident where you guys took those 3 casualties, after they failed to listen to you, did anybody have a conversation with you and tell you that you were right? How was the aftermath, the AAR for that?
So my three platoon sergeants from the company, when they came back from the mission, they essentially were like basically they had all shared the same concerns, but being as how the leadership was and being like how the issues were in 3rd ID at the time, they had done the common sense thing of saying like, okay, like we understand it's a bad plan. We're going to make sure we take care of our platoons. We're going to make sure we take care of our company. But we had to talk about it afterwards, and they're like, like it's rare you would see like somebody try to diplomatically tell a battalion commander, XO and S3, that they may be wrong. They're like, and they're like, and you weren't on an island. They're like, a lot of us shared the issues that you did, and we shared it with our sergeant major. And we essentially just talked about like the leadership at that time just had in their mind that this plan was the plan that was going to work. And because we were, America with tanks and Bradleys or whatever, everything was going to go perfect. But from talking to them, they were like, it's one of those things. They basically told me like, hey, you have to learn, like, this is going to be your whole career. Like, you may think a plan's bad. You may think like we shouldn't do something. Like, they basically said like, once you in charge, like, remember this, and then listen to people that have other ideas or other thoughts on how we should do things. Luckily, none of them had taken casualties. Luckily, like, it wasn't our company, but it was more that, after everything happened of like, like, you were right. We also said something, but nobody changed anything. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And now you were talking about the last incident that did it for you.
Yeah. So the last incident, my company commander went to the KLE. Our cop got attacked. I'm commanding and controlling from inside the TOC. Like, make sure we're getting ammo in the right places, getting my QRF together. And I'm doing something on the radio, and all I hear is like a single shot, just pow, just ring out inside of our TOC. Like, we were inside of an old Iraq building, all concrete, whatever. You know how, like, a single shot. I was like, what the fuck was that? Like, somebody go find out. Obviously, I couldn't stop what I was doing. Somebody basically went and ran. They came back, and they were like, sir, like, somebody had an AD in the middle of the foyer on the way out. And I was like, okay, like, I can't focus on that now. I was like, I'll address it after we get done or whatever. Anyway, we repel the attack. We're going over the AAR. And by this time, my company commander has gotten back. And, I'm walking him through everything I did and what we did, like how many rounds we believe we expended, what happened at each tower, and the assessments we have to make. And we get to the final portion. I was like, but sir, we got to get to the bottom of the fact that somebody had an AD in the foyer. Really, it would have been an ND, but ND in the foyer. And the foyer was like all concrete, little marble floor or whatever. And there was a chip like right in the middle of the floor. So you couldn't deny it happened. You couldn't deny like somebody did it. And he's like, oh, we're never going to get to the bottom of that. Don't worry about it. And I was like, sir, we're infantry. Like, we walk around with weapons all day. Like, we have to do a lot of things. Like, it involves a lot of trust. I was like, we have to find out who had the ND. Got it. You're not going, destroy scorched earth them, but it needs to be an example. We need to find out what happened, why they did it, and why we had an ND, especially during what was essentially a cop gunfight. Like, what if that bullet would have ricocheted? What if he would have shot somebody? He was like, well, nothing happened. There was no issues. Like, I'm not going to investigate it. And I was like, I didn't know what to think. I was like, my entire military career had been like, trigger finger safety, awareness of the muzzle, never have an ND, never have an AD, always knowing what the status of your weapon, just that level of like discipline and detail. And now, like, at a moment when we were supposed to have all the discipline and detail, he's basically saying it didn't matter. And I can see from his perspective how it didn't matter to him, but it was like a huge thing to me because I was like, this is, again, that sign of like where we are discipline-wise. This is where we are with that sign, accountability-wise. And in my mind at that point, I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm done. Like, I was like, I got maybe, 9 more months of this, 8 more months. I was like, let me go ahead, like, tell them, like, I'm done, done with the Army. I'm getting out, so they don't try to slot me in some other position. And, I could do my little time. Like, I'm already stop loss since I've been here, so I'll be able to clear when I get out. Like, I'm just done. I was like, because in my mind, I was like, I was going to have to deal with leaders that I experienced during that trip for the rest of my military career. And I appreciate that because it was a valuable lesson I learned early in my career of, like, not all leaders are built the same, and not everybody deserves to be a leader. So long story short, to get to the South piece, the second I told everybody I was going to get out, I was persona non grata. I was the worst thing ever. They're like, "Oh, you quitting? Like you quitting? Like we're in the middle of deployment, you quitting?" I was like, "No, like I'm gonna finish my deployment. I'm gonna do everything I need to do." I was like, "But like I just wanted to inform y'all so you don't put me in any more positions that will continue to promote me or to continue to put me in a position to be a company commander that I'm probably getting out after this." And you thought like I basically called all them out their name and talked about their mother because in their mind, like I was quitting like mid deployment. And I was like, no, again, not stopping. I'm gonna work just as hard. I know you're gonna send me the staff. I'm gonna do everything you need me to do. I was like, but I don't want to be in third ID and I don't want to be in the Army anymore. So I fell out of like that golden boy status, and then they're like, okay, like well, there's a tasking for 18th Airborne Corps coming down. Like they need a captain who has a Ranger tab and who has at least a secret clearance and is capable of getting a TS and that has combat experience. Like, we're going to drop your name in for it. And I was like, okay. I was like, I got 9 months. I could do whatever. I was like, in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to do resumes during that time. I'm going to find out what I want to do in life. Like, I'm going to start planning that next chapter. I thought it was weird that they, like, the job or whatever was, like, above a TS clearance because I was MI. Like, once I had made captain, they had already started my TS process, so I already had like an interim TS or maybe even a TS at that time. Anyway, they're like, all right, we're throwing your name in, and they're like, just be ready to move at any time. Didn't think anything of it. I went back to like headquarters the battalion for like a day or two at Spiker, getting all my stuff together because I was like, I know I'm moving. I might as well start planning. I told my friends, they was like, man, like you leaving? Like you don't want to be in the Army anymore? I was like, look what we doing, man. I was like, look at who our leadership is. I was like, do you really want to deal with like, however many more years of this? And they're like, no, but we could be the next generation. We can make it better. I was like, I don't know if I got that in me. Like, like this is my second deployment in less than like 3 years. I was like, I didn't seen enough. I've experienced enough. I was like, I think I'm good. And they were shocked. But anyway, I got a call like after I packed all my stuff up. They were like, hey, you got an interview for this position at 18th Airborne Corps. I was like, interview for a position? Anyway,
this is a tasking.
Exactly, this is a tasking. So I got a call from what would it essentially be, the Blue Falcons, I think S3 from 82nd. And he's like, hey, we're tracking your name was put in. Like, tell me a little bit about yourself, your experiences, yada, yada, yada. I was like, okay, like here, this. And he's like, there's like, how are you like working without like a lot of guidance? Like, do you like a challenge, blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I like a challenge. I was like, I like standards. Like I want to be disciplined. Like I understand like there's a grade to things, but like, I'm straight up like committed. And they're like, okay, like based on everything we heard, like, I think you're good to go. Like, we're going to go ahead and select you. I was like, cool. I was like, what do I need to do? They're like, well, like the ring route or a bird's going to be coming in like a day or two. And then, you'll be leaving and you'll just link up with us. And I didn't know anything, so I packed all my stuff. I was like, I'm going to link up with 82nd. I guess I'm going to be, a third ID dude there or some type of staff liaison or work on a staff or whatever. Anyway, I packed all my stuff, like 2 tough boxes or whatever. My bag's on my back. And I'm like, man, like everybody going to hate me on this bird because I got 2 tough boxes. I got this bag and I got it, it's the middle of the night and this helicopter's going to be full of people. And I'm sitting on the flight line, the bird land, nobody in the bird. And I was like,
where's everybody at?
Yeah, I was like, where everybody at? And I was like, hey, I'm Lieutenant Captain Owens. I was like, I'm supposed to be catching a bird. I was going to Balad or whatever. And they're like, yep, like this is it. And I was like, I must be the first person or whatever. So it's cool. So I got all my stuff. I tucked it in the corner. I got my feet up on my box or whatever. I'm trying to take up the least amount of space because I know, everybody gonna get on the bird. It's gonna be crowded. And so I'm tucked in the corner or whatever. And the crew chief's like, he's like, what you doing? And I got he pointed at the headset, and I was like, he's like, what you doing? I was like, oh, I'm just making space. I know you got to pick up a bunch of people. They're like, no, like you it. I was like, what did I get like told I was going to? Long story short, it was JSOC.
Oh, nice.
Exactly. And they were essentially using conventional forces to help support freaking some of the operators. And I got there and I saw that the 82nd was doing essentially, they were doing helicopter infills to help cause, I guess, disturbance in the area, which caused bad individuals to egress. And then all the operators would do hard stops, to basically capture, kill, etc. And I was like, wait, did Third ID know what I was volunteering for? They're like, oh no, we didn't tell Third ID anything. We just told them we needed a captain with this and this and that. I was like, so I left my unit that basically thought I was a shitbag to come work at the 82nd, who's working for like JSOC at the time. And I was like, somebody gonna be mad when they find out that I'm here. Without going into too much of it, like it was during a time when General McChrystal was there and they were doing like, all the operations. I'll just leave it at that. But the best part about it for me was that I didn't know anything about South. I tried to join the Ranger Regiment in between deployments, but because I was in between deployments and we were on the surge, the Ranger Regiment was like, no, like do your time and then come talk to us afterwards. But I would have been a captain afterwards, so it wouldn't have fit my timeline. So I was there in JSOC and I saw I saw discipline. I saw like high standards. I saw like people understanding like, hey, here's the battle drills. This is how we do things. But that's just a template. We can do this. We can do that. I saw accountability. I saw like all these things, and I was like, oh, well, why didn't I know about any of this beforehand? And like I'm on the top floor, and there's a SF major who's running the floor. There's a Ranger Regiment, LNO right here. There's a 160 dude over here. There's a PJ dude over here. It's just all of the special operations community. And I was like, oh, like there might be something to this. And I started talking to the Ranger Regiment guy, and I started talking to the SF dude. Because of the mission that JSOC had going on, there were some SEALs on there as well, and there were also some Gable Stone dudes or Delta dudes, And so I was talking to him, so I was like, I'm getting out. Like I need to know about what else is out there, and talking led to them inviting me to do a workout, or them telling me like, hey, I could come shoot with them. They were doing fast roping with Little Birds one day, and they're like, hey, like, what are you doing? I was like, oh no, I'm off. Like I'm about to go to the gym. They're like, you want to fast rope with us? I was like, yeah, I want to fast rope. And I didn't know, I'd never fast rope. I was in Third ID. We hadn't seen a fast rope in forever. And we walked out to the flight line, and I was like, what? I was like, we gonna fast rope out of this? I was like, a Little Bird, I had never seen one up close. I was like, I'm bigger than this. And the dudes that like next to me, they huge, they operators. So a young captain, I'm sitting there like clipped in on that little bench seat. It feels like if I sneeze, it's gonna shift the Little Bird. And they had gave me a little class, and we had done a little train up. And I'm sitting here, and I was like, I'm about to fast rope out of a helicopter, with like all these operators, people that I didn't know exist. I was like, I might want to do some of this stuff. And I just started talking to like the Green Beret and the Delta dudes or whatever about like some of the things that I could do on the special operations side. And they're like, like you should think about SF. And that just lit it from there. I talked to a buddy who was in Third ID. He was the fires officer in my old company. I was like, hey man, like I'm up here at JSOC. I was like, I'm talking to these dudes. I was like, we had a bunch of conversations about how horrible Third ID is. Like, did you know about SF, or did you know about like all this? And he was like, no. He's like, I didn't know anybody. He's like, my father or my brother knows probably a lieutenant colonel at that time. He's like, maybe I'll talk to him and like see what we got to do to get started. And so that entire time I was there with JSOC. Again, it was during the General McChrystal time, so all the operations was going on, everything was going on. I saw a lot, I experienced a lot, and then 82nd was looking for support for their colonel to basically like be a PSD or lead the PSD. So I ended up leading that, and then I did like I don't know how many just half missions, just all over the place. Fast forward, I leave JSOC. I go back to Third ID like Nobody knew what I was doing. Nobody knew I was even existed. I got on the very last bird of third ID. I saw like the S1 or whatever. He's like, T.O., what you doing here? I was like, I'm redeploying. Like, it's time to redeploy. He's like, oh, like we didn't even know where you were. We just thought you were coming back with 82nd. And I never talked to anybody about it. I never really like said anything about it. But in my mind, I was like, okay, like, you know, I got this much time left. I don't have to. We wouldn't have to like ring a list because I'm an officer. I was like, I can go to selection, see what happens, and go from there. The one issue I had is that because of the surge, I was technically a little bit past my year group to submit my packet. So going back to my field artillery buddy, we basically had to reach out to that lieutenant colonel who he knew to write us like a letter of recommendation to go to selection out of our class. And I talked to him for like maybe a good like 10, 15 minutes. And he's like, no. He's like, you sound like you committed. He's like, you sound like you really want to do it. He's like, I'll endorse you. And again, because I spoke up and I got kicked out of third ID.
It's a blessing in the
exactly,
sky.
I found out about SOF. And
yeah, I think it's accidental for most people that didn't know anything about it. Most of the dudes that I've spoken to, it's been accidental. So now, did you go to selection from third ID?
Yeah, so I went to selection from third ID. Again, like I said, I've been PTing at JSOC with all those dudes. So I knew in my mind, like I was already there. I was like, I just need to add a little bit of weight training. Or I need to add a few things to my kit bag, or add a few things to my arsenal. We had I told my leadership I was going to selection, whatever. They didn't care because I was getting out regardless. Yeah. But we did EIB, the Expert Infantry badge test, before I went to selection. And I was like, this is the first time we've ever done a third ID. This would be a good test to make sure I'm good to go. Because, I had been like PTing. I was technically MI at that time, so they made me the battalion S2. So I had my own section, which meant I could plan all the PT. So I was basically killing my S2 dudes. Shout out to them, because they hated me because they're like, sir, we're not all training to go to selection. Like, can you please tone it down a little bit? And again, we were just doing a regular PT, and then I'd do like a CrossFit workout afterwards. Because, that's back in the day when you couldn't go to the gym during PT hours. But anyway, we did the EIB, and that, again, it was another recognition of me wanting to leave, or why I needed to leave third ID. And I'll never forget it, because I was a young officer, and I was more impressionable at that time. I wasn't as jaded as I am now. Yeah. And so even though I was, I knew I wanted to go to selection, I knew I wanted to be a SF officer, I still wanted that like respect and that understanding in third ID. So when we did the EIB, there's a road march, 12 miler or whatever. And I was like, all I got to do is pass. I don't got to stand out. I'll use this as a gauge on just where I am, EIB wise. And not thinking, because I had never been that mentality, because we had always been deployed, I forgot I was in third ID. Third ID does not do great at rucking. So on the way out, because it's a 12-mile course, so on the 6 miles out, I was like, I'll just stay towards the front. I don't need to like shine. I don't need to do anything like that. And just my natural pace, by the turnaround point, I was at the front. And I was like, I'm here. I was like, I might as well go like as hard as I can to see, how fast I can finish it. I was like, because I'm training for selection. I'm training for a third ID EIB. Anyway, I'll never forget it, because it was probably the last time I really had, I guess, anything to do with my my sergeant major at the time. But EIB is a big deal. It's a big deal in the infantry community. I'm coming back. I'm first, and I'm first by maybe like 3-4 minutes. And at that point, I'm running because I'm like, oh, I'm good. Like, this, I'm gonna rub it in even more for the person that's behind me that they can't catch me. I finished like way ahead of like everybody, and like my sergeant major was standing there and a group of people, and they were like, "Good job, Shy," and that was it. And I was like, I just finished first in EIB, and on third ID in the like on this post, like like this is what we're gonna do, and I was like, oh, that's right. I'm going to selection. So it's a whole thing with, me thinking I'm better than them. Anyway, I wasn't going to take it too personal, but then the NCO that was second came behind me, and everybody was clapping, cheering, like, you can do it. Like, keep pushing. And I was like, Oh, okay. I see what it is. I told them I didn't want to be here when I was in Iraq, and then 2, I told them I was going to selection, and again, that kind of just fueled me as like, I'm gonna make it through this. I'm gonna get selected, and I'm gonna just go on to bigger and better things.
Yeah.
And
so now you go to selection. What year did you go?
I went 2008.
2008.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Because Chris and I went April of 2008. I don't know when in there you went. 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, so I went when it was 19 days. It was towards the end of the year because I was in the December class or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah, so me and my buddy went, the field artillery officer, and which was probably the best thing for me because, it's good to have somebody to talk to when you in that selection because you're like, am I doing it right? Am I successful? But went to selection. It was cold. And I, luckily from Chicago, I had been to Ranger School in the winter. I had been to selection in the winter, so I was already prepared. Did good at selection. Enjoyed most of it, not all of it. Enjoyed most of it, and just remember thinking to myself like how much I was enjoying. 1, people quitting, and then 2, like being successful. Yeah. And I'll say like, and you probably had the same like thought like when I went to selection. It was like get selected or die. Like there was no like in between. Yeah. And we were doing some event. Maybe it was back when you'd had the log roll or something like that. And I remember somebody quit, and I was like, "Oh yeah, you can quit." Like people like actually have that mentality. I was like, I didn't even think in my mind like quitting was an option. I was like, "Oh yeah, I forgot you can quit." And I just remember thinking it was the funniest thing because I was like, "Get selected or die. Get selected or die." Like that was my mentality in every event. And made it through selection, got to the trek. Made it through all of the course, got to the trek, and I only share this because this is my, again, bashing of third ID leadership. Not the people, because I love the soldiers, I love the NCOs and some of the officers there. But during the trek, and it's a long walk, and it's at the end, and you're tired, and you're walking unknown distances. And I'm a good rucker, as we know from the EIB thing. And you don't see anybody, so you never know like how fast you're going or if you like even in the right direction. And I don't know how many hours in, I started to get like tired, and then my feet started to hurt, and I was like, I need to change my socks. Like I don't want, because they make you walk through water right before you start. I was like, I need to change my socks. I changed my socks, and I remember like putting the socks in my hand, and then I woke up, and I was like, oh crap! I was like, I fell asleep. I was like, I didn't know how long I had been asleep. Yeah. I didn't know anything because you're not allowed to have a watch or whatever. Yeah. And I was like, oh, crap. I was like, I can never do that again. And I just started running because I was like, I don't know how long I've been asleep. And I was like, all right, the last person I passed was this person. So if I catch this person, then I know that they passed me. So I know I haven't been asleep that long. And I was just going and going and going. And I didn't see anybody. And I was like, oh, man, like how long was I asleep? It's still dark. You don't have a watch on. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get to my checkpoint. And I was like, I'm gonna have to game this a little bit. So I got to my checkpoint, and the instructor was in the truck, and I was like, all right, we started the trek at this time. I was like, let me lean in just a little bit to see the time, to see where I'm at, because I hadn't seen anybody, I didn't know anything, and I saw the time, and I was like, I fell asleep for like 2 minutes or maybe a minute. It felt like forever, but in my mind I had panicked, and so basically, he's like, all right, you do the little thing, you check in. He's like, keep going, candidate. And I keep going. I'm like, all right, like, I can't fall asleep again. I was like, I got to get through this. I was like, what is the one thing that I don't want to go back to? I was like, I don't want to go back to third ID. I was like, what do I hate about third ID? And I started like naming people in my head. Then I was like, what I really hate is that I have to come every day at 6:30 in the morning and sing the Dog Face Soldier song. So as I was tired on the ruck march, every time I wanted to like stop or everything, I started singing the Dog Face Soldier song. And I sang it for maybe like, I don't know, 5 miles, however much longer on that trek. And every time I started to like think about, oh, I'm tired, or I don't know when the end is, I was like, no. I was like, I want to go back, and I want everybody to know I got selected. I want to go back. I want everybody, know that when I said this or I said that about leadership and discipline, like it was legitimate, and I was holding myself to that standard. And ended up finishing track. I was the third person to finish because, again, I just had that hate for third ID. And it had pushed me through. And I finished the trek, and I remember the last like portion of it. Somebody like came up to me. One of the instructors came to me. He's like, "Hey," he's like, "when you got to my vehicle," she's like, "Was you singing?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was singing." He's like, "What were you singing?" I was like, "The Dogface Soldier song." He's like, "Dogface." He's like, "You third ID?" And you know, they don't ask much about you at that time. I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I was using it as fuel." He's like, "Well, it must have worked." Anyway, I got to my tent, and you remember how it is after the trek. Like, I had shin splints in both legs. Like, my back was hurt. Like, the second I crossed the finish line, I like just seized up. My body was like, "All right, we can't do no more." All I remember is barely making it to my cot. I didn't take anything off, and I just fell asleep face down. Literally face down. When I say face down, it's like on TV when you see somebody. That was how I fell asleep. When the trek was over, or whatever the time was, like, you know, they call everybody out. I couldn't move. Like, I couldn't move for real. I was like, my body had like seized up, and they made us all come out and get in formation, you know, and people coming back on trucks that didn't make it. And I remember thinking, I was like, man, like, look at all these people that got back on trucks. I was like, there's no way I don't get selected. Yeah. Like, if I don't get selected, like, what is going on? And so that gave me a little bit of like help and like a little bit of like mental confidence. I was like, I got all my points on land nav. You know, passed my leadership event. Like, I carried everything heavy. I was top, you know, 5% in the runs. I was like, there's no way I can't be selected. And, you know, like literally that same day, they tell you if you selected. And they brought us to the auditorium, and you know, it's that slow death walk because everybody hurt.
Everybody's quiet.
Everybody wondered, like, did I get selected? Did I get selected? And they did whatever they were doing. They played, I think, John Wayne Green Beret or whatever. Yeah. Never seen the movie, but just to help my mind, like, not be on it, I literally was watching that movie like intensely. Couldn't tell you a lick of it today. Couldn't tell you anything about it, but you know, they did everything they need to do, and then they basically started, you know, did the whole little speech like, I'm going to call off names. And then they started just calling names. They didn't tell us what the names were for. They was just calling off names. And you seeing people like leave the room because they just putting somebody in a separate room. They're like, you're like, okay, like, no, he a shitbag. Like, like, he was good. Like, oh no, but he is shitbag. Like, but he was good. Like, he was good. Like, he was good. Like, oh man, like, are they gonna call me? Are they not gonna call me? And like, I'm just sitting there, and I'm like, no, like, have confidence. Like, you did everything. Like, you from Chicago. This wasn't hard. Like, you tired right now, but you did everything. Anyway, they called everybody into that other room, and I was still in the room, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, all right. Like,
start looking around.
Yeah, I started looking around, comparing myself. I was like, all right, like, I know he was good. Like, he beat me on the run. Like, I saw him on the ruck. Like, I was like, okay, they're the two people that beat me on the ruck. I was like, oh no, but there was a dude that like didn't pass anything, and I was like, oh no. I was like,
start looking at him. Hey, what are you doing here?
And I'll never forget the sergeant major. He's like, unfortunately, I have to tell you all, like, you're gonna be continuing forward. And you know, you so tired, you didn't do everything. And you're like, all you heard was unfortunately. So you were like, and I was like, wait, like, like, I got selected. And I'll never forget, because it was like a culmination of just everything that happened. And then the sergeant major, he probably said the best thing that I needed to hear at that time. He's like, hey, enjoy this moment, enjoy this. Like, you are rock stars. Like, you know, you selected yourself to go to a hard course. You came, you did everything you need to do. He's like, but this is just the beginning. He's like, you're not Green Berets yet. You're not, you know, in the regiment. You still have, you know, to earn the tab, earn your reputation or whatever. And in my mind, I hadn't really thought about it. I was like, oh, like, I just passed selection, but I have like a marathon of things to go. So it was good to be like, hey, I can live in this moment. And then after that, you know, I'll be going on to do the training. Yeah. And after that, and this is the last part about selection, I went during the time where the swim test was afterwards. Was it?
And, so you had to come back to
brag. So we came back to then brag, not for Liberty. And, you know, obviously I'm black. And I'm from Chicago. I learned how to swim because me and my brother were just wild kids. And my mother, just because she needed something to, like, not go crazy, she signed us up for swim classes in the YMCA. Nice. Best thing, like, she just did it because she needed a break, but it was the smartest thing that she ever did for me and my brother, because while we didn't learn how to swim like experts, it gave us that water confidence. I say that because, as you know, everything in the military is a swim test or a water confidence test. And unfortunately, and love my black people, but we're always like the non-swimmers. And again, I know it's some cultural things, just access to pools or just like, that cultural fear of water. In Ranger School and in selection, and I always laugh because it's the same exact scenario, they do the whole thing. You've heard it too, where they're like, hey, weak swimmers, identify yourself. Again, only black dude, there's a lot of white dudes. And I normally have an instructor come stand closer to me so he can repeat it. He'd be like, weak swimmers, identify yourself.
Start nudging you.
Exactly. And I'm like, oh no, Sergeant, I can swim. And I had this incident in Ranger School too. And Ranger School was a lot funnier than selection. But so I was like, oh no, I can swim. He's like, are you sure? I was like, I think I know if I can swim. He's like, I've heard that a lot before. And I was like, no, I can swim. I was like, I dealt with this in Ranger School. I can swim. He's like, we'll see. And I was like, I can swim, sorry. He's like, we'll see. Anyway, jumped in the pool, swam, no issues. And he was like, He's like, so you won line. I was like, why would I need to lie? I just got selected. And the funny thing about that at Ranger School, as a young lieutenant, there was a black RI. And he was like, weak swimmers, step out of line. Or identify yourself, whatever they say. And again, I stood in the line. He's like, weak swimmers, step out of line. He's like, whatever my roster number was. He's like, hey, can you swim? Because I ain't about to jump in this pool to save your ass. I was like, I can swim. He's like, I know, I heard that before. He's like, I have 1,000 students come here all the time. He's like, and it's always some brother who's like, I can swim. They get in there and they just panic. I was like, no, I can swim. I was like, trust me. I was like, it's not an issue. He's like, again, we'll see. And again, it was, I'll never forget, strong Southern accent or whatever. I jumped in the pool, swam. He's like, hold the fuck up. He's like, we got a goddamn unicorn up in Ranger School. He's like, I've never had anybody come here say they could swim. And he's like, where you from? I was like, Chicago. He's like, and you know how to swim? I was like, yeah, long story. He's like, I'm gonna call you unicorn for the rest of the course. And like in my mind, I was like, I can't go through Ranger School with you calling me unicorn. But luckily, I only had him during the bending phase or whatever. But
yeah, it's something that has to change, man, because it's something that where it's a stereotype that like we've just adapted and just kind of accepted, which blows my mind. Now, if you can give any advice to anyone looking at going to selection, both enlisted and also the 18 Alpha community, what would that advice be?
The first thing I would say is like, it all starts with you, like your mentality, your mind, like you believing in yourself. And because I'm sure a lot of people contact you and people talk to me, like people self-select. Mm-hmm. And being like a Green Beret or having gone through the process, you can kind of hear and feel when somebody is like 100% committed to it versus that they're still trying to figure out if they just like the idea of being a Green Beret or they're willing to do the work. So I say the first thing is just, having that confidence in yourself. The next is just understanding, knowing the standards, and then training so those standards are as easy as they can possibly be and that you're prepared for everything. The one thing I could say, like going to selection, like I wasn't worried about PT. I was like, I know I'm above a 300 score guy. That was at the time. But I also had that mentality of like, I'm from Chicago. Like nothing's harder than what I've already did to get to this point. And I had to be honest with myself about my deficiencies, as we talked about with like land nav. I knew I was weak in land nav. So when I was out at Fort Benning, there was the recruiter offered like night day land nav. And again, I'm Ranger tab, EIB at that point, etc. I was there every night doing land nav. And it wasn't that I was like, oh, I don't need to be here. This is above me. I was like, I know this is a deficiency of mine. So I want to make sure it's as strong as possible going into like selection, because I knew I didn't want to have a moment where I was out in the land nav course and I questioned myself, or I didn't take the opportunity to train as much as I wanted to. And it would have been fun to not do it because I could have been hanging out with girls or hanging out with my friends or just doing everything else. But selection was the priority. So I had to treat it like that, which meant I had to humble myself. And Not only did I do like the land nav with that instructor, but I was also like reading the land nav books. In Georgia, they used to have you could do like orienteering, like you pay like $5 and there's a course set up. I went and did that because I was like, hey, I'd rather get lost in practice than than fail during the game. And obviously, I got selected, and I had a lot of confidence going in because I put in those hours and I put in those reps.
Yeah,
and,
yeah. And I think that's important, man, because I talk to some of these kids, or they'll ask me the questions, and they go to selection not prepared.
Yeah.
I had a CSM Haynes here the other day, and he said, don't go to selection if you're not on the extended scale on the PT test.
Yeah.
Because then you're going to crush it.
Yeah.
Same thing with the ruck. Same thing with the land nav. Like, don't go. Like, let Murphy happen.
Yes.
Right? But don't show up and not be 100% prepared. Like, not knowing how to land nav or doubting that you can do a swim test or whatever. I'm like, dude, you know what you have the answer key. Just practice those. So now you get done with selection. How was that reunion back at Third ID? Was it so awesome?
I don't know how it is now, but back in the day, if you basically told your unit you were going to selection, you were essentially dead to them. Dead to the leadership after that. Obviously, there were always people that were going to be rooting for you to succeed, but there was also people that were going to be rooting for you to fail.
Yeah.
I got back, and probably some of it shouldn't have been expected, I'll say, but it was just weird and difficult conversations with like the leadership. Like I got back, and the sergeant major's like, hey, I don't want you talking to any of the soldiers here about selection or telling them about SF or whatever. He's like, you choose to go do that little thing, but don't let anybody else do it. I had to talk to my then battalion commander, and when you do a packet to resign your commission, it's a thick packet. Like it's almost 60 pages or whatever. And I had done all that at Third ID before I did the JSOC and the selection thing because I want that trump card in case something happened at selection. Anyway, I had to talk to him to undo my resigning of the commission, which is one page, by the way. That's how the Army gets you. You got to do 60 pages to get out. I had to sign one thing to stay in. But anyway, I was having a conversation with him. He's like, you passed selection. He's like, good job. He's like, but I see it as like a cop out. You want the easy way out. And I was like, excuse me, sir? He's like, no. He's like, in Third ID, you're gonna get those challenges of, soldiers not wanting to be here, not having the equipment, everything not, handed to you. Like, that's a challenge. He's like, you're gonna go where people want to work out, people want to do this, people want to do that. And I was like, sir, I'm going to a place where everybody is giving 100%. Everybody's holding themselves to the highest standard. Like, how is that going to be easier? He's like, we don't have the problems of the conventional Army. And I thought at first he was joking. I was like, sir? He was like, yeah. He's like, it's the easy way out. And in my mind, I hadn't put two and two together. I was like, well, maybe he went to a selection and didn't get selected, or maybe he had a bad experience with SF or whatever. And he said all that to me straight face. And I was like, so going SF is the easy way out, huh? And I was thinking to myself, I was like, well, tell that to my shins and knees, because I'm just hurting from the selection process. And so that happened. And then I had a little more time before I had to go to the captain's career course, because this is before they had the RSOF CCC or whatever. And then you went to either like the armor or the infantry career courses, and then you went to finish or start the Q course. I had a little time, and I was the S2, and I had a new battalion commander come in. We weren't doing great as far as organization on PT, and they had this thing called the Sledgehammer Award. Essentially, every battalion could put up soldiers, and if you scored, I think you had to score above a 300 on a PT test, and then they had an extended scale with dips and pull-ups. Anyway, they hadn't had anybody pass it, and my then battalion commander, who I knew from my first deployment and my first deployment in Third ID, was like, hey, he's like, TL, I know you're going to selection. He's like, I really need to get some people to win the Sledgehammer Award. He's like, would you do it? Would you represent the brigade? I was like, yeah, it's PT test. I'll do it, sir. Not a big deal. I was like, if I do it and I'm successful, I was like, can I go to Pathfinder School? And he's like, yeah. He's like, you know what? If you do it, like, you can take us out to Pathfinder School. I was like, all right, sir, I'm going to hold you to it. I was like, I'm going to send this message to you in the email so I have written proof later on so you can't come back. Again, we had that good relationship, so he knew I was joking. But he's like, no. He's like, you do it. Not an issue. So I did the sledgehammer thing, got the award, represented the brigade or whatever. I was like, sir, I got the, whatever the score was. He's like, nope. He's like, go talk to schools. You go to Pathfinder School. My three, the three in the XO were upset that I was taking a Pathfinder slot and I was leaving the organization. One of them was a fat armor dude, and the other one was a infantry dude who had been teaching at West Point beforehand. They were majors as well. And I guess they were trying to go to the battalion commander directly and say oh, don't send him to Pathfinder School. He's leaving us. He's going to SF. It's a waste of a slot. The battalion commander was like, nope, man of my word. He did what he needed. He helped out the unit. He can go ahead and go. Fast forward, I'm in the last day of Pathfinder School. You have to take a test. It's 5 sections. I'm getting ready to I'm studying for the test. I've been studying all night, and it's the last little crunch session, and I get a call from the XO. He's like, hey, I just found out after the battalion commander said you can go to Pathfinder School, you went back door and got yourself a slot. I need you to unenroll now. I was like, sir, I'm on the last day getting ready to take the test, and I'll be done. I was like, I can come and talk to you after this. He's like, no. You need to disenroll now. I was like, sir, I'm not doing that. I was like, and he's like, you need to do it right now. I'm coming up there. I was like, sir, and I gave him the address of the Pathfinder School. I'm right here. I was like, I'm student number this. I was like, I will be here taking this test. I was like, if you want to come pull me out, that's fine. I was like, but you should probably talk to the battalion commander beforehand. Long story short, he was upset again that I had been through selection and I was leaving and I was going to be SF, and he thought that again, the slot should go to somebody else, and then he tried to fabricate a story that had gone around him. And I learned early in my career to always keep emails. Oh, yeah. So I had the email from the battalion commander, I had the email from the schools guy, I had the email from the schoolhouse, which I had CC'd him all on. And I just basically after I finished and passed the test or whatever, I went back to the battalion commander. I was like, hey sir, I'm not even gonna get involved. I'm just going to send you these emails, and I'll let you take care of it from there. The battalion commander took care of it, but it was, again, just another situation where this fat XO tanker, which I took it personally, obviously, tried to basically say, oh, you're not giving to third ID, you don't get any benefits, you're cheating or you're leaving or whatever it was.
And I think that mindset still exists, man, because leaders are still punishing soldiers for going to selection or for wanting to go to selection. They are no shit doing that. And I'm like, when you have a guy go to selection and he gets selected, that should be a prideful thing for you as his leader.
Yeah, because you created that.
You created that guy. Yes. You mentored that. That should be that should make you feel good.
Yeah,
not the other way around. And I get these calls and emails all the time where guys are they're afraid to tell their leaders that they want to go to selection, or if they're selected, their leaders put them on shitty details. And I'm like, that's what's wrong with the Army today. This shit blows my fucking mind.
Yeah. Well, there's two parts of that, unfortunately. There's some dudes who really want to go. Some guys and gals actually really want to go to selection and train up. And there's dudes who used to get out of trips to Korea or trips to ROTC. So,
but those dudes typically don't last. Those dudes are back in their unit within the first week.
True. It's just that unfortunate thing that I guess some of those dudes had to deal with. So.
Yeah. So now you get done with the with selection. How was the Q course for you? Were there any challenges or were there any issues there for you?
No, Q course was good. The biggest thing with the Q course was just learning all the SF stuff and just adapting to that. Being in kind of that different environment where everybody was top performing, and just again looking at what I essentially need to improve upon, and just looking at my deficiencies on how to strengthen them. I'd say the one incident I had, and I guess it was a semi weird racial incident or whatever, is we were getting ready to do a jump, and when I was in the 18 Alpha course, and one of the instructors, the jump master, we were on a Cashe, and you know how those are. And we were getting ready to jump. And the jump master came up, and he talked to the dude in front of me, and then he talked to the dude behind me. In front of me, he was like, the dude in front of me, he's like, hey, make sure you're walking good. He's like, be careful. And I heard all this secondhand because I wasn't paying attention. He's like, be careful. This dude behind you is going to be riding your butt. And then I guess the dude behind me, he said, like, hey, like, give the guy in front of you plenty of space. You know how those people are in the aircraft. Now, I didn't hear any of this. And
what do you mean, you people?
Exactly. And I was jumping with all my classmates, and they're all white, minus one person. He was Asian. But I didn't hear any of it. I wasn't worried about it. I had done my airborne stuff at, from Ranger School to Pathfinder School to just airborne school. I actually had the most jumps in that airplane. So I wasn't even thinking about it. But then when I landed, both of those dudes came to me. They was like, hey, did you hear what that sergeant said? And I was like, no, I didn't hear it. I was just checking my stuff. They was like, yeah, he said this and he said that. And I was like, I ain't worried about it. I was like, one day, like, I'll rank that dude and, like, I'll get my tab and I'll just move on. I was like, I'm not worried about ignorance. I was like, I'm not worried about, like, intent. I got, a goal. But that was probably my biggest incident that I had throughout the Q course. Other than that, it was, like, straightforward. I was successful in all phases. I learned a lot about myself, especially as SEER. I learned a lot about SF. I learned a lot about what I wanted to bring to a team, what I thought I should be bringing, and just a lot of bad examples of what not to bring to a team as well.
Gotcha. So now you get done with the Q course. Well, for starters, was Rocky always just goofy looking?
Yes,
we love you, Rocky.
Rocky was with me the whole time. Have I told you the story about we went to the range?
Yeah, the glasses.
Yeah, Rocky didn't wear his glasses the first time, and then he didn't qualify. Then he put on his BCGs afterwards and qualified. I was like, Rocky, why aren't you doing it in the first place? He didn't want to because he was embarrassed. I love you, Rocky. I love you. But
so now you get to third group, and you go. Now, was 2-3 your first team, or how did all that develop?
2-3 was my first team. Again, it was almost similar situation when I got to third ID. I got to 2-3. When you're in the 18 Alpha course, you do all the, affirming of your clearances. Mm-hmm. You get your military passport. You do all that stuff. So I had done all that, and when I got to third group, I was going to third group. I was obviously supposed to go to a specific battalion. And the team was then slated to potentially go to, I want to say, Pakistan or somewhere in vicinity. And the team leader previous to me had let his passport lapse. And so I basically showed up and they were like, you got a red passport? All right, it's time for him to leave anyway. You going to 3123. And I was like, that's it? Like, because I got a passport? And again, it's just... And
you want to see my Ranger tab
yeah,
too?
Exactly. But like in SF, a lot of stuff is just timing and when you show up. And I got to the team and, I had heard all the stories about from like in the 18 Alpha course of don't be a mascot. Like you in charge when you get there. Like, learn personalities, like understand the team. Don't come in thinking, you run everything. And I took all that to heart because, I was like, these are the people that I'm potentially going to war with. Like we're going, it's just us 12 against the world. Like I need to know, understand, and respect all these individuals. So I got to the team after the other team leader, and we ended up not going to Pakistan, and we got turned on to go to Afghanistan. And during that time, I was just like, man, I need to learn the team. So I did the normal thing, me and a team sergeant, we went out to lunch. We talked about our goals for the team. He gave me kind of the background on everybody, and then I just told him about like my leadership style and like what I was going to bring to the team and what I expected. And again, it wasn't anything crazy. It was more of a like, hey, I understand that you are, the operations person of this. Like I'm in charge of making the plan. I'm in charge of informing the leadership. I'm going to lead. But it's mostly through like me doing what I do and through you as the team sergeant. And we had a good relationship, I'd say 98% of the time, but that's every team. You know how it is. Yeah. Like there's going to be a time y'all fight. I literally met with everybody on the team and I did like, I won't call it counseling, but I did like, one-on-one get to know you, learn where you're from. Ask them how they receive information, how they like to be told information, how they like to be complimented, how, what gets to them if they fuck up and they want to be told they fucked up. Because that way I knew like in those high stress moments or dangerous moments, I don't need to be like, hey Jay, like, did you know about the color blue? Because you don't like that. You want to be told directly, like, hey, like, you messed up. Help me, tell me how I fix it. And I just learn personalities. I learn, like, what helps them be successful individuals, and kind of like their goals and like just their drives.
Yeah.
And that team, obviously 3123, everybody I lucked up was a great team, minus the one medic that we had that had his own personal things. But we went to Afghanistan, I want to say shortly after I took over the team, and super successful with the asterisk of all the SF shenanigans that goes on. But as you know, still some of my best Army friends, and just closest friends to this day.
So. And if you guys aren't familiar, you guys are just blind. 3123 that's my old team. So some of the guys that he's talking about, I serve with, and I want to say you left right before I got to the because we had your going away party at Rob's house.
Yep. So
once you took off, like I inherited most of those dudes that Chris, Rocky, and all those guys, and I've always been curious, like, how do you? So I know how Alden did it, which he did an amazing job, but how were you able to manage all those fucking personalities, man? Like, how did you? Because I'm curious about that.
No, and as a team sergeant, like, it's organized chaos. Like, we used to joke that we are a functional family, and for like most people, like listening to the podcast, like, think of it as like you in the varsity locker room and you with 12 alphas, and not just like 12 alphas, but like 12 alpha team captain mentality. And then, like, you have to lead them. It was basically the mentality of, like, hey, I'll give you all the rope you have to earn, and I'll give you all the rope and all the trust to basically get something done. And I'm also going to give you enough rope and trust to hang yourself. Like, you choose, which path you're on. And I'm going to support you. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to take advice from you on things that, you have from perspective. But in the end, like, understand, like, I'm in charge, and not like in charge, like I'm in charge, you gotta listen to me. But like, if I don't want to do something, or if I think we shouldn't do something, it's because we don't have a good enough plan, or it's not going to bring everybody home, respectively, or it's too dangerous to justify when we could do it later when the situation is optimal, or we can prep it to be perfect. So it was just building that trust, spending that time, putting in the work, and then like being an officer, but then not being an officer. And I say that from the point of like, well, most people don't understand about like leadership and all my time in the Army, just all my time like as a leader, period. Like, leadership is great when you're in it. It's like outstanding to see like the successes, to see people grow, to have people under your command who, go and do great things, become team sergeants, etc. But it's lonely at the end of the day because it starts and stops with you. And I say that because, like, as a leader from my time at 3rd ID and everything, I never wanted to look back and be like, I should have did something or said something, and, Jay wouldn't have been hurt, or, such wouldn't have been killed or something. Like, I wanted to, I guess, as they say, stand on business and be 100% upfront, right in the front, and establish that hard line of, I want to say perfection, but, nothing's ever perfect, but as close to perfection as possible, and doing everything we could possibly do to be successful. Yeah. You don't control Murphy. I don't control where bullets, fly, what bombs go off. But I want to make sure we train. I want to make sure we brief. I want to make sure everybody did what they're supposed to do. And I think that one just came through in how I talked to and dealt with everybody on the team. And it also just came through with like how I interacted with the leadership and represented the team as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, because... yeah, those dudes are still. Well, I think we still have a couple of dudes still serving, but for the most part, everybody's out. And but to your point, since dudes have been out, we still found a way to keep it together, and that speaks volume to like how tight the team was. Yeah. You know what I mean?
We have a text thread, so not one that we can talk about in your podcast, but
So that's awesome, man. So now, before we transition to the rest of your career. if you had any last piece of advice for any of the future 18 alphas out there, because I know a lot of them have been asking for this podcast as far as 18 alphas perspective, what would that be? Like if you had to do it all over again, what's one piece of advice that you wish you would have heard from folks that were ahead of you?
So it's a little bit convoluted. I would say control your destiny as much as you can, and also learn what success is and learn what success is for you. And so it's a little bit convoluted because in SF, which you kind of know, and officers learn after they get to the regiment, your career is tied to the leadership that's in the seat when you're there. It's not anything that can hinder or hurt you, but as you progress through the SF regiment, the next jobs you get, the future positions you're considered for is based off of who knows you, who you worked for, etc. You don't control who's at the unit in charge of you when you get there, but you control with the people you make relationships with, the people who see your work ethic, the people you brief, etc. You have to take those micro instances and turn them into, I guess, benefits if you want to progress through the regiment that way. The other thing I would say is that know, I guess, what success is for you, what your end state is, and essentially what's going to make you happy. I say that because the Q course, and it's geared to be the best echo when you get to the team, be the best team leader. Nobody tells you what happens after you're a team leader, what happens after you're a junior and senior echo. So as an officer, you're focused on, I'm going to be the best team leader, I'm going to be the best team leader, I'm going to be the best team leader. And then, 75% in, they're like, hey, you're not going to be a team leader anymore. You're going to go to staff. What do you want to do after that? And you're like, oh man, I've been trying to be the best team leader for so long. I don't even know what I need to do next, or I didn't think about what I need to do next. And I heard they do a better job of that in the course now, but I was just hyper focused. And luckily I knew being a team leader in combat was one of the things I wanted to do in SF. And then the second thing I wanted to do was have just as many experiences as I possibly can. And that was whether it was in a leadership position, whether I was representing the regiment somewhere, whether I was tasked to do something. Because as I learned earlier in my career, there's going to be times where you're not the smartest person in the room. You're not going to be the most well-read person. But if you're ever the most experienced person in the room, people, listen, if you can tie it back to an incident or an experience and you're the only one that's had it, or, you and only a handful of people have had it, you then become the expert in that room. And it's a powerful thing. And I say that from I got off on that power, but it helped me just appreciate everything I did more because, as an SF guy, and I'll beat the drum to everybody who says it, the SF enlisted career, you do things that I have problems getting regular staff officers to do now. And I'm assigned to a conventional unit, and sometimes I just want to say, hey man, I can get an E6 SF dude to do the job that you, Lieutenant Colonel, are scared to do right now, or to that you won't do right now, because I've seen it, and I know you've been put in those positions, and all your peers have been put in that position, and again, it's just that experience because you had it, you were successful, and I could put you in a room with majors and lieutenant colonels who've been career officers their entire lives, and they haven't briefed or they haven't done an inch of what you've done or a smidgen of what you've done. Now I put that on the officer side of comparing myself to all the other officers, and I've done things that colonels or generals have done, briefing dignitaries, being the highest ranking individual in the area, and just things most people will never understand. I was put in that position because I understood that A, I want to be a successful team leader in combat, and I want to get all the experiences I possibly can from in my career.
Yeah. Now, as you transition out of the military, is that something that because what do you have, another year? Give or take?
A year-ish.
Gotcha. Beyond the Beret aspect of it. Well, before we transition beyond the Beret, do you have anything else you want to share before we close it out, whether it's career-wise, experiences, or any of that?
No, I mean, I think the biggest thing I would say for everybody who's like looking to be a Green Beret or an officer or just like serve, like you have to find your why. Like, again, I never was like the biggest patriot, but through all my service and all the places I've gone and things I've seen, like there's an aspect of patriotism like I can never deny on just like what is the United States and the opportunities that the military has afforded me. And when I say the military, I'm talking about the experiences and the people, etc. I have my issues with the Army and the bureaucracy and everything else, but I can't take away from like the relationships I've made, the places I've gone, the things I've done, the educational benefits, just financially where I am and how I've fostered that generational growth in my kids of, you don't have to be in the military, but look at all the opportunities, that I can educate you on because I know, as again, a dude from the south side of Chicago who didn't know that I was ever going to leave the city, going back. And I would say once you find that why, and if you are going to be an officer or, you have to understand like you are in charge of, I guess, one of the most valuable resources in the world, which is like people's sons and daughters. And it's one of the reasons that like I rub some people the wrong way in the military and some people like truly believe what I say is because when I'm in charge, like I'm in charge of fictitiously your son or daughter. Like if I make a mistake or if I'm selfish, if I do something that I didn't do or did to prepare, like you trust me with your son and daughter, I didn't take that responsibility seriously. Now I cost them, their life. I cost them a limb. I'm destroyed their career, whatever the situation is. So as an officer or as a future leader, even for NCOs, understand that responsibility. And it's hard sometimes to maintain that the entire time. But if you see a soldier, male or female, you think like, hey, how would I want, my son or daughter's leader to be? And you think about like how you're going to be, and how you're going to prepare somebody to, be successful in combat or be successful in the military. Like it'll make you take it like serious as much as possible. And again, nobody's on 24/7. We all have fun. We do things, but you and I know like, when it's business, it's business. I'm going to train you hard. I'm going to make it rough. I'm going to make it tough because if we make the training and we make the teaching hard when it comes time to do it, like it's all easy. It's all, expected, etc.
Yeah.
A little bit of rambling, but I get what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So now as you transition out of the military here in a little bit, what's on the horizon for you? Like, what are you looking at doing?
So background wise, I have a master in cybersecurity, which I found through special operations, actually, my level of cybersecurity. So that's one avenue. Obviously, you and I are working on something with Alpha to Zulu Solutions.
Yeah.
And then just as I transition, mentoring like a lot of young officers, a few officers and NCOs just on one, either going to selection or while they're in the Q course, preparing for that day-to-day, grind. And just trying to share as much information, with individuals as I transition. And then, being prepared to be, hopefully, a teleworking stay-at-home dad, get more involved or spend more time with my kids, and, wife, etc.
Yeah, that's important, man. The kids.
Yes.
But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. Like I said, I know there's someone in Chicago that's probably going through identical situation as far as where you were at when you first joined the military. And we'll close it off with this question that I always ask people. If you can give any advice to that younger 19, 20-year-old TO that's currently in Chicago trying to figure out what to do with his life, what would that advice be?
My first advice would have been stay away from the girls as much as you did because that was part of my biggest problem. And then have that mindset or have that mentality that, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Like regardless of like where I started, I never would have pictured myself where I am, or even the opportunities I have going forward. So just have that, grind it out mentality that nothing's a microwave. It's not going to happen instantly. You got to do the work. You got to put in the time.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. But yeah, man, I appreciate you coming on. Folks, if you have any questions for us or if you have any comments, just leave it in the comment section below. Until next time, take care of yourselves.